Take a deep breath. Let your eyes gently close or soften. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, you're here now. Welcome to this soothing historical journey. Tonight, we're traveling back to medieval Europe, to a time when the person who cut your hair might also have been the one to set your broken bone or extract a painful tooth. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from and what time is it for you? Drop a comment below. I read everyone's comment. It's a small way to feel connected, and kindly consider subscribing this channel. I'd love to see you again. Now let's start today's historical journey. Imagine yourself now, walking through the narrow, winding streets of a medieval town in the year 1320. The air carries a complex tapestry of scents: freshly baked bread from the baker's ovens, the earthy smell of animals and hay, the occasional waft of herbs from an apothecary's shop, and yes, sometimes the less pleasant aromas of a world without modern sanitation. The streets beneath your feet aren't paved as we know them today, but rather packed earth that turns to mud when it rains. In some wealthier neighborhoods or main thoroughfares, there might be cobblestones, uneven and slippery when wet, but an improvement over the mud. Wooden planks sometimes bridge particularly muddy sections after rainfall, allowing townspeople to cross without sinking ankle-deep in muck. The buildings lean in toward each other overhead, their upper stories jutting out further than their lower ones, creating a sense of enclosed space with just a ribbon of sky visible above. This architectural style, known as jettying, allows for more living space on upper floors while keeping ground floor frontage and therefore taxes to a minimum. The buildings themselves are primarily timber-framed, with the spaces between filled with wattle and daub, a mixture of twigs and clay that creates surprisingly effective insulation. All around you, there's the gentle cacophony of medieval life, the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer striking anvil, the calls of merchants advertising their wares, the clatter of wooden wheels on cobblestones, and the occasional burst of laughter from children playing with hoops or simple wooden toys. From an open church door, you might hear the soft chanting of monks or priests at their daily offices, marking the rhythm of the day for the entire community. Street vendors call out their wares: hot pies, fresh hot pies, or rushes, sweet rushes for your floor. The smell of roasting chestnuts mingles with the less appealing odors of open sewers in certain areas. Dogs and chickens roam freely, while the occasional pig might be seen rooting around in the refuse along the street edges. People move past you dressed in woolen garments, browns, greens, and undyed fabrics for the common folk, while the occasional merchant or noble might display more vibrant colors, a visible symbol of their wealth and status. Men wear hose and tunics, women in long dresses with aprons and head coverings. Everyone, you notice, wears some form of hat or head covering. Bare heads were uncommon in this era. The clothing tells its own story of social hierarchy. The quality of the wool, the fineness of the weave, the presence or absence of embellishments, all signaling the wearer's place in society. Sumptuary laws in many regions actually regulated who could wear what, reserving certain fabrics, colors, and trimmings for the nobility and forbidding their use by commoners, regardless of wealth. The marketplace forms the beating heart of this medieval town. Stalls and shops cluster around an open square where farmers from the surrounding countryside bring their produce, craftspeople sell their wares, and news and gossip flow as freely as the ale from nearby taverns. Market day brings an even greater bustle of activity, with specialized vendors arriving from other towns, perhaps bringing exotic spices from distant lands or fine textiles from renowned weaving centers. Near the market, you might find the town's public oven, where housewives bring their bread dough to be baked for a small fee. Few homes have private ovens, making this communal facility essential to daily life. The smell of baking bread wafts from its stone structure, mingling with the countless other scents of urban medieval life. Religious buildings dominate the skyline. The parish church with its stone tower, perhaps a cathedral if this is a larger town, and possibly the walls of a monastery or convent on the outskirts. These institutions provide not just spiritual guidance, but many social services, from education to care for the sick and elderly. The church bells mark the hours, calling people to prayer and structuring the rhythms of daily life. As you continue your walk, you might notice a curious pole outside one particular shop, a pole with spiraling red and white stripes. This is the sign of the barber surgeon, one of the most versatile and necessary craftsmen in any medieval town. It's to this shop that we'll direct our attention tonight, as we explore why those who cut hair also cut into the human body to heal it. The barber's pole catches your eye with its distinctive pattern, standing out among the hanging signs that identify other businesses. The bunch of grapes for a tavern, a pair of scissors for a tailor, a golden pretzel for a baker. In a world where literacy was limited, these visual symbols were essential for navigating the commercial landscape of the town. Take a moment now to really visualize this medieval street scene. Feel the uneven ground beneath your feet, hear the multi-layered sounds of commerce and conversation, smell the complex aromas of urban life. This is the world of the barber surgeon. Practical, vital, deeply embedded in the community fabric. But before we enter the barber's shop, take another deep breath. Feel the weight of your body sinking deeper into your bed. Let the tension in your shoulders release as we continue our historical journey. The divided world of medieval medicine. To understand why barbers became surgeons, we must first understand the unusual division in medieval healthcare. In this time, medicine was practiced by three distinct groups, each with their own social status and permitted practices. At the top of this hierarchy were the physicians, university-educated men who had studied ancient Greek and Arabic medical texts in Latin. These learned doctors focused on theory and diagnosis, examining patients, studying urine samples, and prescribing treatments based on the theory of the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, which were believed to govern all aspects of human health when in proper balance. The education of these physicians was primarily theoretical rather than practical. At the great medical schools of Salerno, Montpellier, Bologna, and Paris, students spent years studying ancient texts, particularly the works of Galen, Hippocrates, and Avicenna. They engaged in scholarly debates about abstract medical concepts, often with minimal contact with actual patients or hands-on healing. Their training emphasized diagnosis and prescription rather than physical intervention. Picture a university physician in his distinctive long robes, perhaps wearing the square cap that marked him as a graduate. He moves with the deliberate dignity of a scholar, carrying perhaps a small chest containing devices for examining urine. Glass flasks held up to the light to assess color, clarity, and consistency. The physician's status is reinforced by his ability to read and write Latin, the international language of scholarship, and his familiarity with classical authorities. A physician might feel your pulse, examine your tongue, and perhaps smell your breath before determining which of your humors was out of balance. They would then prescribe treatments to restore this balance, special diets, herbal remedies, or perhaps recommending procedures like bloodletting to remove excess blood. The physician's approach was holistic in theory, considering factors like diet, environment, activity levels, and even emotional states when diagnosing illness. The concept of regimen, a carefully prescribed lifestyle to maintain or restore health, was central to their practice. This might include recommendations about food and drink, sleep patterns, exercise, and even the frequency of bathing or sexual activity, all calibrated to the individual patient's humoral balance. For the wealthy patient, a consultation might begin with the physician asking detailed questions about recent activities, diet, and bodily functions. The doctor might then examine the patient's urine, brought to him in a special flask called a matula. The color, smell, consistency, and even taste of the urine were all considered important diagnostic indicators. After this examination, the physician would consult astrological charts, as the position of planets was thought to influence health, before prescribing a personalized treatment plan. What physicians generally did not do, however, was touch the body in any invasive way. The influential Catholic Church had declared in 1163 at the Council of Tours that the Church abhors blood, and this ecclesiastical pronouncement had profound implications for medicine. University-trained physicians, many of whom were clerics or had clerical training, were effectively barred from surgery or any procedure that involved cutting the body, setting bones, or otherwise causing blood to flow. This prohibition reflected both religious concerns about ritual purity and intellectual prejudices. Manual labor, including surgical procedures, was considered beneath the dignity of learned scholars. The Latin phrase ecclesia abhorret a sanguine, the church abhors blood, became a guiding principle that shaped medical practice for centuries to come. Moreover, physicians were typically expensive, catering primarily to the nobility, wealthy merchants, and high-ranking clergy. Their services remained inaccessible to the vast majority of the population, creating a substantial gap in healthcare that needed to be filled by more accessible practitioners. As you lie there, breathing slowly and deeply, imagine the frustration of a medieval physician who could diagnose an ailment but was forbidden by both custom and religious decree from physically treating it. This created a peculiar gap in medical care. Who would perform the necessary physical interventions if the learned doctors could not? Into this gap stepped two groups, the barbers and the guild surgeons. The guild surgeons were skilled practitioners who had learned their craft through apprenticeship rather than university education. While they lacked the theoretical knowledge of physicians, they possessed practical expertise in surgical procedures. In some regions, particularly in southern Europe, these surgeons formed their own guilds, similar to other skilled crafts, with clear hierarchies of masters, journeymen, and apprentices. Guild surgeons specialized in more complex surgical procedures, removing bladder stones, repairing hernias, performing cataract surgery by pushing the clouded lens out of the field of vision with a needle, and treating complex wounds and fractures. They might also be called upon to treat wealthy patients when physicians recommended surgical intervention. These guild surgeons occupied a middle position in the medical hierarchy, above barbers but below university physicians. In some cities, particularly in Italy and France, surgeons fought to improve their status, creating educational programs that included some theoretical training alongside practical skills, gradually elevating surgery from a craft to a more respected profession. But guild surgeons were relatively few in number and often served primarily in larger cities or with armies during times of war. Their services, like those of physicians, remained beyond the reach of most ordinary people. Furthermore, in many Northern European regions, surgeons were not organized into separate guilds but remained part of the Barbers Guild, maintaining the connection between these practices. This brings us to the Barbers, the most accessible medical practitioners for ordinary people throughout much of medieval Europe. But why barbers? What connected the cutting of hair to the cutting of flesh? The answer lies in their tools, their accessibility, and a surprising connection to the powerful monasteries of medieval Europe. Let your mind drift back now as we explore how the humble barber's shop became a place not just for grooming, but for healing. Pause as soft medieval-inspired music plays for a few seconds. I hope you're feeling comfortable and relaxed as our story continues. If you're enjoying this historical journey so far, remember to give this video a gentle tap on the like button. It helps more people discover our soothing historical narratives, and we'd appreciate your support. Now let's return to our exploration of medieval medicine. From monastery to marketplace, the origins of barber surgery. The connection between barbering and surgery begins surprisingly in medieval monasteries. In these centers of learning and prayer, monks were required to maintain a specific appearance, including the distinctive tonsure, a shaved area on the crown of the head that signified their religious devotion. To fully understand this connection, we need to step inside the stone walls of a medieval monastery, where life followed the disciplined rhythm of regular prayer, study, and work. Benedict's famous dictum, Ora et labora, pray and work, structured the lives of monks throughout Europe, with the day divided by the canonical hours, matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline, each marked by the ringing of bells and gathering for prayer. Among the many regulations governing monastic life were specific rules about appearance. Monks were expected to embody humility and rejection of worldly vanity through their clothing and grooming. The most visible symbol of this was the tonsure, a shaved circle on the crown of the head, surrounded by a ring of short hair. This distinctive haircut immediately identified someone as a cleric and symbolized their commitment to religious life. Imagine the quiet routine of a monastery, where the rhythmic chanting of prayers punctuates the day. Among the daily tasks, there was the regular maintenance of the monk's appearance. Some brothers within the monastery would be assigned the duty of shaving the tonsures of their fellow monks, using sharp razors and basins of water. In the chapter house or a designated room, monks would take turns sitting on a simple wooden stool while a brother skilled with the razor carefully maintained their tonsure. This was not just practical grooming, but a ritual that reinforced their shared identity and commitments. The shaving might be done in contemplative silence or accompanied by soft prayers or readings from scripture, turning even this mundane task into an opportunity for spiritual reflection. These monastery barbers needed tools for their work: razors for shaving, scissors for trimming hair, bowls for water, and cloths for wiping away lather. They developed steady hands and precision through regular practice, skills that would prove valuable for other purposes. Monasteries also served as centers of healing and medical care. Following Christ's example of caring for the sick, many monastic orders considered tending to the ill a sacred duty. Monastic infirmaries provided care for sick brothers, and in many cases for lay people from the surrounding communities as well. Larger monasteries might have separate buildings designated as hospitals, with monks assigned to care for patients. These same monastery barbers, due to their skill with sharp implements and their access to the sick who came to monasteries for care, naturally began to perform basic surgical procedures. They lanced boils, pulled teeth, and performed bloodletting, a common treatment thought to release bad blood and restore the body's humoral balance. Consider a typical scene in a monastic infirmary. A lay brother who serves as the monastery's barber examines a fellow monk suffering from a painful abscess on his arm. Having seen similar conditions before, he knows that lancing the swelling to release the accumulated pus will provide relief. With the same steady hand he uses for shaving tonsures, he makes a precise incision with a small, sharp knife. The patient grimaces but feels immediate relief as the pressure is released. The barber monk then cleans the wound with wine, applies a poultice of healing herbs from the monastery garden, and bandages the area with clean linen. Monasteries were also centers of learning, where ancient medical texts were preserved, copied, and studied. Some monks developed considerable medical knowledge through reading works by Galen, Hippocrates, and Arabic medical writers like Avicenna and Rhazes, whose works had been translated into Latin. This theoretical knowledge, combined with practical experience in the infirmary, made monastic healers among the most sophisticated medical practitioners of the early medieval period. The monastic herbal garden played a crucial role in this healing tradition. Carefully tended plots grew medicinal plants mentioned in ancient texts and those whose properties had been discovered through practice. Herbs were harvested at specific times, dried, and prepared into tinctures, poultices, and teas according to recipes recorded in the monastery's collections. The barber monks would have access to these remedies, applying them as part of their healing practices. However, this arrangement was destined to change. In 1123, at the First Lateran Council, and again in 1215 at the Fourth Lateran Council, the Church issued edicts that gradually restricted monks from practicing surgery or medicine outside the monastery walls. As with the physicians, the Church was uncomfortable with its clerics shedding blood, even for medical purposes. The Fourth Lateran Council specifically decreed, "No cleric shall practice any art which involves bloodshed, nor shall he make any surgical operation involving burning or cutting." This prohibition, combined with concerns that medical practice might draw monks away from their spiritual duties and into the secular world, led to a significant shift in who provided surgical care. As monks retreated from this role, they passed their knowledge and skills to their lay assistants, the barbers who had been helping with the tonsures and basic procedures. These men already possessed the necessary sharp tools and basic skills, and now they inherited a tradition of hands-on healing. Close your eyes and picture a monastery barber teaching his lay assistant the careful art of bloodletting or tooth extraction. The knowledge passing from hand to hand demonstrated rather than written down a practical education in healing that would soon move beyond the monastery walls and into the medieval towns and villages. Watch carefully. the monk might say, guiding his assistant's hand as they prepare to lance a boil or extract a rotting tooth. Not too deep, just enough to release the bad humors. See how the swelling has a yellowish center? That's where you must make your incision. This apprenticeship model would become the standard way that surgical knowledge was transmitted for centuries to come. As these lay barbers moved into towns and established their own shops, they brought these medical skills with them, filling a crucial gap in healthcare. They became the primary providers of surgical interventions for ordinary people who could never afford the services of physicians or specialized surgeons. By the 13th century, barbers were establishing themselves in towns across Europe, hanging their red and white poles as advertisements for both haircutting and surgical services. The pole itself, as we'll discover later, was intimately connected to one of their most common medical procedures. In some regions, particularly in Northern Europe, barbers formed guilds that regulated both the grooming and surgical aspects of their trade. These guilds established standards for apprenticeship, set prices for various services, and protected their members from competition by unlicensed practitioners. They also provided a form of social security, supporting members who fell ill or helping their families after death. As you relax deeper into your bed, feel the weight of history settling around you. The transition of medical knowledge from cloistered monasteries to public barbershops represents one of the most fascinating evolutions in healthcare, and it's a transition that would shape medicine for centuries to come. Take a deep breath now, feeling the gentle rise and fall of your chest. Allow your body to sink deeper into comfort as we continue our journey. If you're enjoying learning about medieval medicine, remember that subscribing to Historical Slumbers will bring more soothing historical narratives to your evenings. Now, let's step inside a medieval barber shop to discover the fascinating world where grooming and converged. The barber's shop, a multifunctional space. Let's now step inside a typical barber's shop in a medieval town. The space is small but functional, perhaps with wooden floors strewn with fresh rushes or herbs that release a pleasant scent when crushed underfoot. Sunlight filters through small windows, supplemented by the warm glow of tallow candles or oil lamps. As you cross the threshold, you're greeted by the distinctive aroma particular to these establishments. A complex blend of soap, medicinal herbs, perhaps a hint of blood from recent procedures, and the subtle fragrance of whatever pomades or hair treatments are popular among the more fashionable citizens. The air might carry a slight metallic tang from the barber's regularly sharpened tools. The layout of the shop is organized to serve its dual purpose. Along one wall stands a bench where customers wait their turn, perhaps thumbing through a crudely printed almanac or simply observing the barber at work. Conversation flows freely here. The barber's shop is as much a social hub as a place of business, where news and gossip are exchanged alongside haircuts and medical treatments. The center of the shop features the barber's chair, sturdier and more substantial than the other furniture. It might have arms for the customer to grip during painful procedures, and perhaps a headrest that can be adjusted for shaving or dental extraction. Some more prosperous barbers might have a specialized bleeding chair with armrests specifically designed to support a patient's arm during bloodletting. Nearby, a hearth provides warmth and hot water, essential for both shaving and various medical procedures. A kettle might hang over the fire, ready to provide warm water for shaving lather or for cleaning wounds. In winter, the hearth would be the heart of the shop, drawing customers to its warmth as they wait their turn. The walls are adorned with various certificates and licenses if the barber belongs to a guild, proudly displaying his professional standing. In some shops, anatomical illustrations might be posted, crude by modern standards but useful references for basic procedures. A shelf might hold a few precious books if the barber is literate, perhaps including texts like the widely circulated Chirurgia Magna by Guy de Chauliac, which provided illustrated guides to surgical techniques. The tools of the barber's dual trade are displayed prominently or kept in leather rolls: sharp razors for shaving, scissors for cutting hair, bowls for lathering soap, and basins for catching blood during surgical procedures or bloodletting. You might also see more specialized instruments: dental forceps for extracting teeth, lancets for opening veins, cupping vessels for drawing blood to the surface, and perhaps bone saws for more serious operations like amputations. These tools are arranged with care, reflecting their value and importance to the barber's livelihood. Quality instruments were expensive and often passed down from master to apprentice. A successful barber might own several sets of razors and scissors, each maintained with meticulous attention. The sharp edge of a razor or lancet was tested on a hair or piece of paper, needing to be keen enough for precise work, but not so delicate that it would chip or bend during use. Look more closely at the lancets used for bloodletting, small, sharp blades with ornately carved handles, sometimes made of ivory or polished wood. Their design has barely changed since ancient Roman times, a testament to the enduring nature of this medical practice. Nearby, you might see the cupping vessels used in a variation of bloodletting, glass, pottery, or metal cups applied to the skin after small incisions were made, drawing blood to the surface through suction. Dental instruments might include a pelican, named for its resemblance to the bird's beak, used to extract teeth by gripping them firmly and leveraging them out of their sockets. Various probes and hooks for examining and cleaning teeth sit alongside these extraction tools, evidence of the barber's role in maintaining oral health. Herbs and salves sit in small pottery jars or wooden boxes, ready to be applied to wounds or used as rudimentary anesthetics. Willow bark, containing the natural precursor to aspirin, might be brewed as a tea for pain. Hemp or opium derivatives could be used for more serious pain management, though their use was limited and often reserved for the most excruciating procedures. A shelf might hold jars of leeches for an alternative form of bloodletting, the creatures swimming lazily in water until needed. These living medical tools were valued for their ability to draw blood from specific areas without requiring an incision, particularly useful for sensitive regions or when precise control of bleeding was desired. Bandages of clean linen are stacked ready for use, perhaps soaking in a mixture of wine or vinegar to clean wounds, an early form of antiseptic treatment, though the barber wouldn't understand the science behind why this helped prevent infection. Suture materials, threads of silk, linen, or animal sinew wait nearby, ready to close wounds after surgeries. The barber himself is a man of practical knowledge, dressed perhaps in an apron stained with both hair dye and blood stains. His hands are nimble and steady, equally adept at styling a nobleman's beard or lancing a painful abscess. He is a tradesman rather than a scholar, having learned his skills through apprenticeship rather than formal education. Watch as he moves confidently around his shop, shifting easily between grooming and medical roles. In the morning, he might trim the hair and beard of a merchant preparing for a business meeting. By midday, he could be extracting a rotting tooth from a farmer who's traveled from a nearby village specifically for this service. In the afternoon, perhaps he performs routine bloodletting for a regular client who comes monthly to maintain his humoral balance. The barber's apprentice, often a boy as young as 12, assists throughout the day, learning by observation and gradually taking on more responsibilities. He might start by sweeping the floor and maintaining the fire, then progress to preparing lather and sharpening tools, eventually assisting with procedures, and finally performing simple ones himself under supervision. As you visualize this scene, feel your breathing become slower and deeper. There's something soothing about imagining these spaces where everyday people sought both grooming and healing. The barber shop was a community hub, a place where news was exchanged, rumors shared, and human connections maintained alongside the practical services offered. The barber knew his regular customers well, their preferences for hair and beard styles, their recurring ailments, their family situations. This personal knowledge often informed his treatments in ways that the more distant physician's theoretical approach could not. He might adjust his advice based on a customer's work requirements, family circumstances, or previous reactions to treatments. Customers might come in for a shave and leave having had a tooth pulled or a minor wound treated. Others might arrive specifically seeking medical help for anything from headaches to broken bones. The barber surgeon was, for many ordinary people, the most accessible healthcare provider in their world. Take another deep breath now, feeling yourself relaxing deeper into comfort. as you envision this vital space in the medieval urban landscape, a place where the practical arts of healing and grooming intertwined to serve the needs of ordinary people in their daily lives. Now, as you continue to relax, let's explore the range of medical services these versatile practitioners provided in an apron stained with both hair dye and bloodstains. His hands are nimble and steady, equally adept at styling a nobleman's beard or lancing a painful abscess. He is a tradesman rather than a scholar, having learned his skills through apprenticeship rather than formal education. As you visualize this scene, feel your breathing become slower and deeper. There's something soothing about imagining these spaces where everyday people sought both grooming and healing. The barber's shop was a community hub, a place where news was exchanged, rumors shared, guilandis, and human connections maintained alongside the practical services offered. Customers might come in for a shave and leave having had a tooth pulled or a minor wound treated. Others might arrive specifically seeking medical help for anything from headaches to broken bones. The barber surgeon was, for many ordinary people, the most accessible healthcare provider in their world. Now, as you continue to relax, let's explore the range of medical services these versatile practitioners provided. The barber surgeon's medical services. The barber surgeon's repertoire of medical services was surprisingly extensive, making them invaluable members of medieval communities. Let's explore some of the common procedures they performed, beginning with perhaps their most iconic service, bloodletting. Bloodletting was based on the ancient theory that illness resulted from an imbalance of the four bodily humors. When someone had a fever, for instance, they were thought to have an excess of blood, and removing some would supposedly restore balance and health. The barber would use a sharp lancet to open a vein, often in the arm, and collect the blood in a basin. This practice, known as phlebotomy, was not performed randomly. Medieval medical texts provided detailed guidance on when and where to bleed patients based on their symptoms, the season, astrological signs, and other factors. Different veins were associated with different organs or conditions. Bleeding from the cephalic vein near the thumb was believed to help with headaches, while the basilic vein in the inner elbow was preferred for liver complaints. Charts called vein men or wound men, stylized human figures marked with appropriate bleeding points for various ailments, often adorned the walls of barbershops, serving as reference guides. These illustrations helped barbers identify the correct veins and explained which conditions each location could treat. The timing of bloodletting was considered crucial. Almanacs indicated favorable days based on astrological alignments, and some periods, such as during pregnancy or extreme old age, were generally avoided. Spring was considered the ideal season for preventative bloodletting, as the body's blood was thought to increase with the rising sap in plants. As you imagine this scene, you might see the barber carefully tying a tourniquet above the patient's elbow, asking them to clench their fist to make the veins more prominent. With practiced precision, he would make a small incision, controlling the flow of blood and monitoring the patient for signs of weakness. When he judged enough blood had been removed, perhaps several ounces, he would apply pressure to stop the bleeding and bandage the small wound. The collected blood might be examined for signs of imbalance. Excessive frothiness, unusual color, or strange odors were all considered diagnostically significant. The barber might explain to the patient what these characteristics revealed about their condition and what additional treatments might be beneficial. Many people underwent bloodletting as a preventative measure rather than a treatment for existing illness. Particularly among the wealthy, regular seasonal bloodletting was believed to maintain health and prevent disease, similar to how many modern people view annual checkups. Beyond the direct method of venesection, opening a vein, barber surgeons practiced other forms of blood removal. Cupping involved placing heated glass cups on the skin to create suction, drawing blood to the surface. Wet cupping combined this with small incisions to draw out blood, while dry cupping simply brought blood to the skin's surface without actual bleeding. Another method was the application of leeches, living blood-drawing tools that could be applied to specific areas, particularly useful for sensitive regions where lancets might be dangerous. The barber would store these creatures in special jars, carefully selecting and applying them to the appropriate area of the patient's body. Dental care was another crucial service. In an age without modern dentistry, toothaches could be excruciating and potentially life-threatening if infections spread. The barber surgeon would extract damaged teeth using specialized forceps, sometimes breaking the tooth and removing it in pieces if necessary. While primitive by today's standards, this service provided essential relief from what could otherwise be unbearable pain. Dental problems were widespread in medieval Europe, resulting from a diet increasingly rich in refined carbohydrates and sugars among those who could afford them, combined with limited understanding of oral hygiene. Tooth decay, abscesses, and gum disease affected people across all social classes, making the barber surgeon's dental services essential. Before extraction, the barber might apply various pain-relieving substances to the gum, preparations containing clove oil, which contains eugenol, a natural anesthetic, henbane, or opium for the most severe cases. For wealthy patients, a piece of linen soaked in alcohol might be provided to bite down on during the procedure. The extraction itself was performed with specialized dental instruments, pelicans, named for their resemblance to the bird's beak, dental forceps of various designs for different teeth, or elevators to loosen the tooth before removal. The barber would grip the tooth firmly and pull with a quick, decisive movement, trying to remove it intact to prevent fragments from causing further problems. After extraction, bleeding was controlled with pressure, and the socket might be packed with materials soaked in soothing or antiseptic substances like clove oil or wine. Patients were advised to rinse with salt water and avoid hard foods until healing began. Beyond extractions, barber surgeons might clean teeth by scraping away tartar buildup, treat gum infections with astringent herbal preparations, and occasionally attempt to fill cavities with materials like lead, cork, or gold foil for those who could afford such luxury. Setting broken bones was also within their purview. Using knowledge passed down through generations of practitioners, barber surgeons would manipulate fractured limbs back into proper alignment, then stabilize them with wooden splints and bandages. The patient might be given wine or stronger substances to dull the considerable pain of this procedure. The diagnosis of fractures relied on careful observation. The barber would look for obvious deformity, swelling, bruising, and loss of function. Gentle palpation might reveal crepitus, the grating sensation of bone fragments moving against each other, confirming the diagnosis. Setting the bone required both knowledge and physical strength. Assistants might hold the patient still while the barber applied traction to realign the bone fragments. Once properly positioned, the limb would be immobilized with splints made of wood, bark, or other rigid materials, padded with linen or wool to prevent pressure sores, and secured with bandages. The barber would provide instructions for care during healing, keeping the limb elevated, applying cold compresses initially to reduce swelling, and later warm poultices to promote healing. He might schedule follow-up visits to check alignment and adjust bandages as swelling decreased. Minor surgeries were common services, lancing boils and abscesses to drain infection, removing skin growths, treating wounds, and even performing simple amputations when limbs were too damaged to save. In an era before antibiotics, removing dead or infected tissue quickly was often the only way to prevent fatal infections from spreading. Wounds required particular attention in an age when even small injuries could lead to life-threatening infections. The barber surgeon would clean wounds thoroughly, often using wine or vinegar, both containing natural antiseptic properties, remove any foreign material, and assess the damage to underlying structures. For deep wounds, suturing was essential to close the gap and promote healing. Using needles of bone, ivory, or metal, the barber would stitch the wound closed with thread made of silk, linen, or animal sinew. Different suturing techniques were used depending on the wound's location and depth. Interrupted stitches for most wounds, continuous stitches where tension was minimal, and more complex patterns for facial wounds where minimizing scarring was important. After closing the wound, healing salves might be applied, typically containing ingredients like honey, a natural antibacterial, comfrey, which promotes tissue regeneration, or plantain, which has anti-inflammatory properties. The wound would then be covered with clean linen bandages, changed regularly to monitor healing and prevent infection. For women, barber surgeons sometimes assisted with difficult childbirths, though midwives were the primary birth attendants. Only when complications arose that required surgical intervention would the barber surgeon typically be called. When summoned to a difficult birth, the barber surgeon might perform procedures that midwives were not trained to handle, using specialized hooks and forceps to extract a dead fetus that threatened the mother's life, performing crude cesarean sections, almost always after the mother's death to save the child for baptism, or surgically removing retained placenta that could cause fatal hemorrhage or infection. Many barber surgeons also treated skin conditions, from common ailments like boils, warts, and rashes, to more serious conditions like erysipelas, a bacterial skin infection, or the various manifestations of what was then called leprosy, which included several different skin diseases. They applied poultices, ointments, and specialized baths, and performed surgical removal of growths when necessary. Eye problems were another area of treatment. Barber surgeons might remove foreign bodies from the eye, treat infections with herbal preparations, and even perform cataract surgery by a procedure called couching, using a needle to push the cloudy lens of the eye downward out of the field of vision. While crude and risky, this operation could restore some sight to cataract sufferers. The treatment of injuries from violence or accidents formed a significant portion of the barber surgeon's work. In an era when personal violence was common and workplace safety non-existent, traumatic injuries occurred frequently. Stab wounds, broken bones from falls or brawls, burns from workplace fires, and crushing injuries from falling objects all required the barber surgeon's attention. As you continue to relax deeply, envision the medieval barber moving confidently between these varied tasks, from trimming a beard in the morning to setting a child's broken arm in the afternoon. Their practical knowledge, passed from master to apprentice, was a crucial element of public health in a time before formal medical systems existed for ordinary people. If you're still awake, take a moment to check that you're in a comfortable position. Perhaps turn your pillow to the cool side or adjust your blanket. And if you're finding value in our historical journey tonight, remember to give the video a like and consider subscribing for more historical bedtime stories. Now, back to our medieval barbers. Tools of the trade. The barber surgeon's instruments. The barber surgeon's instruments tell us much about the practice of medicine in medieval times. These tools were precious possessions, often passed down from master to apprentice, each with a specific purpose in the barber's dual role as groomer and healer. Imagine a leather roll unfurled on a wooden table, revealing a collection of metal instruments, each with its own story to tell. At first glance, some might be familiar even to modern eyes, while others speak to practices long abandoned. The razor was perhaps the most fundamental tool, used for shaving beards and preparing surgical sites by removing hair that might harbor infection. Medieval razors were typically made of steel, with a folding blade that could be closed for safety when not in use. They required frequent honing and stropping to maintain their edge, a skill the barber would perform almost meditatively during quiet moments in the shop. Unlike modern disposable razors, a medieval barber's razor represented a significant investment. The steel was expensive, and the craftsmanship required to create a properly balanced, sharp blade was considerable. A good razor might be used for decades, gradually becoming thinner through repeated sharpening until it eventually became too narrow for practical use. The handle, often made of bone, horn, or hardwood, was sometimes decorated with carvings or inlay work, reflecting the barber's status and prosperity. The more elaborate the handle, the more successful the barber was likely to be, a visual signal to customers about the quality of service they might expect. Sharpening a razor was itself an art form. The barber would use a whetstone, typically a natural stone like novaculite or slate, to grind a precise edge on the blade, then finish it on a leather strop, often treated with abrasive compounds to perfect the cutting edge. A properly sharpened razor could cut through hair with minimal pressure, reducing discomfort for the customer. Scissors varied in size and design, from small, delicate pairs for detailed work around the ears and nose, to larger ones for cutting hair. Some barber surgeons also use scissors in surgery to trim away dead tissue or cut suture thread after closing wounds. Medieval scissors differed from modern ones in their construction. Rather than being made from two separate blades riveted together, they were often forged from a single piece of metal bent into a U shape to create spring tension between the blades. This design, while less precise than modern pivot scissors, was more durable and easier to maintain. For more specialized cutting during surgical procedures, the barber might use a small knife called a scalpel, the ancestor of modern surgical scalpels. These featured slim, extremely sharp blades with precisely shaped cutting edges, designed for making clean incisions that would heal with minimal scarring. For bloodletting, the lancet was the tool of choice, a small, sharp blade with a narrow point, allowing for precise incision of veins. These were typically double-edged, coming to an acute point that could pierce the skin with minimal pressure. The handle was often longer than the blade, giving the barber precise control over the depth of the incision, critical for opening a vein without damaging underlying structures. Some barber surgeons also used fleams, spring-loaded devices with multiple blades that could make quick, shallow cuts for bloodletting. These were particularly useful for patients who were anxious about the procedure, as the cuts happened too quickly for anticipatory fear to build. A fleam typically featured several blades of different sizes, allowing the barber to select the appropriate one based on the location of the bleeding and the desired flow rate. Cupping vessels, small glass, metal, or horn cups, were used in a variation of bloodletting. The barber would create a vacuum inside the cup by briefly inserting a flame and then quickly applying the cup to the skin. This would draw blood to the surface, sometimes after small incisions had been made, in a process called wet cupping. The cups themselves varied in size and shape depending on their intended placement on the body. Smaller cups might be used for the face or hands, while larger ones were appropriate for the back or thighs. Glass cups were preferred when available, as they allowed the barber to monitor the color and quantity of blood drawn without removing the cup. The creation of the vacuum was a skilled procedure. The barber would hold a small piece of alcohol-soaked cotton or paper in metal tongs, light it, briefly insert it into the cup to consume the oxygen, and then quickly place the cup on the patient's skin. The cooling air inside would contract, creating suction that drew skin and surface blood vessels up into the cup. For maintaining leeches, another bloodletting tool, the barber kept specialized jars with perforated lids, allowing the creatures to breathe while preventing escape. Applying leeches required skill. The barber might encourage them to attach by placing a drop of sweet liquid on the skin or by making a tiny incision to draw them to the desired location. Dental tools included forceps of various designs for extracting different teeth. Some had curved beaks for molars, others straighter jaws for front teeth. A dental pelican, named for its resemblance to a pelican's beak, was used to leverage teeth out of their sockets, though this often resulted in broken teeth or damaged gums. The dental pelican consisted of a shaft with a curved hook at one end and a padded fulcrum that rested against the gum. The hook would grasp the tooth, and then the barber would rotate the instrument using the fulcrum as a pivot point to lever the tooth out of its socket. While effective, this method frequently damaged adjacent teeth and gum tissue. Later developments included the dental key, an instrument resembling a door key with claws that gripped the tooth. The barber would rotate the key to lift the tooth from its socket, a method that offered somewhat more control than the pelican, but still caused significant trauma to surrounding tissues. For exploring and cleaning wounds, probes of various designs were essential. These slender metal rods, sometimes with a small bulbous tip to prevent tissue damage, allowed the barber to determine the depth and direction of wounds, locate foreign bodies like splinters or arrowheads, and assess the extent of damage. Bullet extractors became increasingly important as firearms became more common in warfare. These specialized tools featured long, narrow jaws that could be inserted into gunshot wounds to grasp and remove lead balls and other projectiles. Some designs included a screw mechanism at the tip that could be threaded into a lead ball to provide a secure grip for extraction. For more serious surgeries, the barber surgeon might possess bone saws, trepanning drills for relieving pressure on the brain, and various hooks for manipulating tissue during operations. These instruments were typically stored in a separate case, reserved for major procedures rather than routine shop work. Bone saws came in various designs depending on their purpose. Frame saws, which resembled modern hacksaws with a thin blade held taut in a metal frame, were used for amputations. Smaller, more delicate saws might be used for procedures like trepanning, cutting a hole in the skull to relieve pressure on the brain, a procedure dating back to prehistoric times that was still performed in the medieval period. Cauterizing irons, heated in the fire until red hot, were used to stop bleeding by burning blood vessels closed, a painful but sometimes life-saving intervention in an age before sutures were commonly used. These came in various shapes and sizes, with different heads designed for specific purposes: broad, flat ones for larger areas, and smaller, pointed ones for precise work on individual blood vessels. The management of bleeding was one of the barber surgeon's greatest challenges, particularly during major procedures like amputations. In addition to cautery, they used techniques like direct pressure, tourniquets, and styptic substances, materials that constrict blood vessels, such as cobwebs, moss, or specialized fungal preparations. Suturing needles and thread made of linen, silk, or animal sinew allowed for the closing of wounds. The barber surgeon would pass the thread through the edges of the wound and tie it carefully, bringing the skin together to promote healing. Needles varied according to their purpose, with curved needles preferred for most wound closures, as they could be passed through tissue in an arc, making it easier to achieve proper closure. These needles were typically triangular in cross-section, with sharp cutting edges that could penetrate tough skin more easily than round needles. The choice of suture material depended on availability and the nature of the wound. Silk, when available, was preferred for facial wounds where minimal scarring was desirable. Linen thread was commonly used for general wound closure, while animal sinew, often from deer or cattle, provided strength for wounds under tension. Beyond these metal instruments, the barber surgeon's toolkit included various substances for wound treatment and pain management. Containers of different sizes held poultices, ointments, and powders, some made by the barber himself, others purchased from apothecaries. Pain management relied heavily on alcohol, particularly strong spirits that could dull sensation quickly. For more severe pain, preparations containing opium might be used, though these were expensive and reserved for the most serious procedures or wealthiest patients. Plant-based preparations, such as those containing henbane or mandrake, provided sedation and pain relief, though their potency and effects could be unpredictable. As your mind drifts with these images of ancient medical tools, consider how each represents both the ingenuity and the limitations of medieval medicine. These practitioners worked without the benefits of antibiotics, anesthesia, or detailed anatomical knowledge, yet managed to provide essential care with the tools available to them. Some of these tools, like scalpels and surgical scissors, would be recognizable in modern operating rooms, albeit in more refined forms. Others have been completely abandoned as medical understanding advanced. Together, they tell the story of how humans have continuously sought to develop technologies that extend the healer's ability to treat injury and illness. Feel the weight of your body sinking deeper into your bed as we continue our journey through the world of the barber surgeon. Soft music. Take a moment now to notice how relaxed you've become as we've explored these historical details. Let your breath come naturally and easily as we continue our journey into medieval medical history. And if you're enjoying this soothing historical narrative, remember to subscribe to Historical Slumbers for more bedtime journeys through time. The barber pole, a symbol in blood and bandages. Perhaps no symbol is more closely associated with the barber's profession than the iconic barber pole, that spinning cylinder with its distinctive red and white spiral pattern. But few people today realize that this cheerful-looking sign has its origins in one of the barber surgeon's most common medical procedures, bloodletting. As you relax and listen, picture a medieval town square. Among the shops and stalls stands a barber's establishment, marked by a pole extending from the doorway. Unlike today's mechanical rotating poles, this one is simply painted with diagonal stripes of red and white. The origin of this symbol lies in the bloodletting process itself. When performing this procedure, the barber surgeon would provide the patient with a pole or staff to grip, which served two purposes. It helped the patient keep their arm extended and steady, and the muscular action of gripping the pole made the veins more prominent and easier to access. Imagine a medieval patient seated in the barber's chair, anxiety evident on their face as they prepare for bloodletting. The barber hands them a wooden pole, about the length of a walking staff but thicker, instructing them to grip it tightly and pump their hand to make the veins more visible. The customer's knuckles whiten around the pole as the barber prepares his lancet. After the procedure, the bandages used to stop the bleeding would be washed and hung on this pole outside the shop to dry. As they twisted in the breeze, stained with the red of blood despite washing, they would create a spiral pattern of red and white, the visual precursor to the painted barber pole that would eventually become standardized. These drying bandages served as a practical advertisement. Potential customers passing by would immediately recognize that bloodletting services were available within. In an age before widespread literacy, such visual cues were essential for business identification. This practical origin gradually evolved into a recognizable trade symbol. By the late Middle Ages, barbers were displaying painted poles instead of actual bandages, creating a permanent advertisement for their bloodletting services. The white stripes represented the bandages, the red the blood, and sometimes a blue stripe was added to represent the veins. The painted poles became increasingly elaborate over time. Some were carved with spiral grooves that were then painted, creating a three-dimensional effect. Others featured ornate finials at the top, decorative elements that might include a ball, spear point, or even carved figures related to the trade. The size and ornamentation of the pole often reflected the prosperity and status of the barber. A successful barber surgeon in a wealthy urban area might display a large, elaborately painted pole, while a humbler practitioner in a village might have a simpler version. In England, the red and white pole became associated specifically with barbers who offered surgical services, while all blue poles sometimes indicated a barber who only cut hair. When the professions began to separate in the early modern period, this distinction in signage helped customers know which services were available in a particular establishment. In France, regulations actually specified what type of pole could be displayed by different practitioners. Barber surgeons were permitted to display red and white poles, while wig makers and barbers who did not perform surgery were required to use yellow and white signs, a form of early business licensing visible to even illiterate customers. The tradition of the barber pole traveled to the American colonies with European settlers, maintaining its association with combined barbering and surgical services. As the professions separated in America as well, the pole remained with the barbers rather than following the surgeons to their new professional establishments. The addition of a brass basin at the bottom of some poles, often designed to catch rain and prevent the wooden pole from rotting, eventually became associated with another aspect of the barber surgeon's trade. These basins resembled those used to catch blood during bloodletting or to create lather for shaving, further strengthening the visual branding of the profession. By the 19th century, mechanical rotating barber poles began to appear, adding movement to the traditional colors. The rotation was first achieved through wind power or manual mechanisms, before electric motors made continuous rotation practical. This movement enhanced the visual appeal, drawing even more attention to the barber's establishment. The famous red, white, and blue spinning poles common in the United States represent a particularly American evolution of the symbol. The blue stripe, which may have originally represented veins, took on patriotic associations in America, though the traditional red and white remained more common in Europe. The barber pole thus stands as one of history's most enduring trade symbols, a direct visual link to medical practices that have long since been abandoned. Today, we pass these spinning poles outside barbershops without giving much thought to their bloody origins, but they remain silent witnesses to a time when barbers were essential healthcare providers. In some countries, legal disputes have arisen over who has the right to display the barber pole. As tensions between barbers and surgeons evolved into modern conflicts between barbers and medical professionals, some jurisdictions have passed laws restricting the display of the pole to licensed barbers, preventing its use by other businesses that might confuse consumers. As you continue to relax deeply, perhaps drifting towards sleep, let these images of medieval life surround you like a soft blanket, connecting you to the rich tapestry of human history. The barber pole, from its practical origins in bloodletting to its evolution as a trade symbol to its modern incarnation, represents a tangible link to our medical past, a visual reminder of how healthcare practices have evolved over centuries. If you're still with me, take a moment to notice how relaxed your body feels now, each breath carrying you deeper into comfort. And if you're enjoying this historical journey, remember that subscribing to Historical Slumbers will bring more soothing historical narratives to help you drift off to sleep. Now, let's continue our exploration of medieval barber surgeons. Learning the craft, apprenticeship, and guilds. How did one become a barber surgeon in medieval times? The path to this profession began not in universities or medical schools, but in the workshop of an established practitioner, through the time-honored system of apprenticeship. Imagine a young boy, perhaps 12 or 13 years old, bidding farewell to his family to join the household of the local barber surgeon. This transition marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. No longer primarily a child in his parents' home, but not yet an independent adult. Instead, he would enter a liminal state as an apprentice, neither family member nor employee in the modern sense, but something unique to the medieval social structure. For the boy's family, this arrangement offered several advantages. It provided their son with training in a respected craft that promised a stable livelihood. It reduced the number of mouths to feed at home, a significant consideration for families of modest means. And it placed the child in a household that likely enjoyed higher status and greater prosperity than their own, potentially creating valuable social connections for the future. This apprenticeship would typically last 7 years, during which the boy would live with his master, receiving food, shelter, clothing, and instruction in exchange for his labor and assistance. A formal contract would be drawn up, often recorded in town or guild records, specifying the terms of the arrangement. These contracts included various provisions to protect both parties. The master agreed to teach the apprentice all aspects of the trade, not just menial tasks. He promised to provide adequate food and clothing, treat the boy humanely, and ensure he received moral and religious instruction. In return, the apprentice and his family agreed that he would serve faithfully, keep his master's secrets, avoid gambling in taverns, and not marry during the apprenticeship period. The early years would be spent on menial tasks, sweeping the shop floor, maintaining tools, preparing lather for shaves, and observing the master at work. The apprentice might be responsible for opening the shop in the morning, lighting the fire, heating water, arranging tools, and preparing for the day's customers. Daily life followed the rhythm of the wider community, typically beginning at dawn and ending at dusk. Meals would be taken with the master's family, with the apprentice expected to observe proper table manners and household rules. Sundays and holy days brought a break from work for church attendance and perhaps limited recreation. Living in such close proximity to his master, the apprentice absorbed not just technical skills, but also business practices, ethical norms, and social behaviors appropriate to the profession. He learned how to interact with customers of various social standings, how to determine fair prices for services, and how to maintain professional dignity. Gradually, the apprentice would be entrusted with simple tasks, helping to hold patients during procedures, preparing bandages, or assisting with hair cutting. The progression of responsibilities was carefully calibrated to match the developing skills and maturity of the young apprentice. Perhaps he would first be allowed to shave customers, a relatively simple procedure with low risk if mistakes were made. Success with the razor would lead to opportunities to cut hair, a task requiring greater dexterity and aesthetic judgment. Only after demonstrating competence in these basic barbering skills would the apprentice begin to assist with medical procedures. As the years passed, the master would share more of his knowledge, how to identify different ailments, which treatments to apply, the proper technique for bloodletting or tooth extraction. The apprentice would learn through observation, practice on willing or desperate patients, and sometimes through study of illustrated manuscripts, if the master possessed them. Imagine the apprentice's progression, first watching intently as the master performs bloodletting, then helping to prepare the equipment and comfort the patient, later being trusted to tie the tourniquet and prepare the site, and finally, under close supervision, making his first careful incision with the lancet. Each step represented not just the acquisition of a skill, but a deeper incorporation into the profession's identity. This hands-on education emphasized practical skills rather than theory. While university-trained physicians studied ancient texts by Galen and Hippocrates, debating the finer points of humoral theory, the barber surgeon's apprentice learned the very real mechanics of how to stop bleeding, clean wounds, and provide pain relief. The learning was embodied and tactile, developing the sensitivity in his fingers to locate a vein, recognizing the feel of a loose tooth ready for extraction, gauging the proper tension for a suture. These physical skills could only be acquired through repeated practice under guidance, not from books or lectures. The relationship between master and apprentice was complex. The master served as employer, teacher, surrogate parent, and role model. He had significant authority over the apprentice, including the right to administer physical discipline if deemed necessary, though excessive cruelty could result in intervention by guild officials or town authorities. Yet successful masters recognized that treating apprentices well served their own interests. A well-trained, loyal apprentice enhanced the shop's reputation and productivity. Many masters developed genuine affection for their apprentices, sometimes even treating them as surrogate sons, particularly if they had no male children of their own to inherit the business. By the final years of apprenticeship, the young man would be performing many procedures under supervision, developing the steady hands and confidence necessary for the profession. He would have observed hundreds of treatments and begun to develop his own understanding of which worked best for particular conditions, building on his master's teaching while incorporating his own observations. Upon completing his term, he would become a journeyman, often traveling to work in different towns to broaden his experience before perhaps one day establishing his own shop. The term journeyman derives from the French journée, day, as these workers were typically paid by the day rather than being permanently employed. As a journeyman, the barber surgeon would work in established shops, bringing his skills and perhaps knowledge of different techniques from his original training. This period served multiple purposes. It allowed him to save money toward eventually opening his own shop, exposed him to regional variations in practice, and helped him build a reputation and client base of his own. In larger towns and cities, barber surgeons formed guilds, professional associations that regulated the practice, maintained standards, and protected their members' interests. These guilds set rules about who could practice, what services could be offered, and what fees could be charged. They also provided a social network and a form of insurance, supporting members who fell ill or helping their families after death. Guild membership conveyed significant benefits. It granted the legal right to practice within the town or city, protected members from competition by unlicensed practitioners, and provided a framework for resolving disputes between practitioners or with customers. Guilds also organized religious observances and social events, creating a sense of shared identity and community among members of the profession. The process of joining a guild as a master barber surgeon involved demonstrating both skill and character. The aspiring master typically needed to produce a masterpiece, a demonstration of exceptional skill in the craft, which might involve performing certain procedures under the observation of established masters. He also needed character references attesting to his moral standing and trustworthiness. Financial requirements presented another hurdle. New masters needed to pay substantial entry fees to the guild and prove they had sufficient capital to establish a proper shop with appropriate tools and supplies. These economic barriers helped maintain the status and income levels of existing members by limiting competition. The Guild of Barber Surgeons in London, for example, was granted a royal charter in 1462. giving them legal authority to regulate barbering and surgery throughout the city. Similar guilds existed across Europe, from Paris to Florence, each with their own regulations and traditions. Guild officials conducted regular inspections of members' shops to ensure tools were properly maintained, premises were clean, and practices met established standards. They also acted as a court for professional disputes, adjudicating complaints from customers or conflicts between practitioners. In some cities, the guild maintained a hall where members could gather for meetings, educational demonstrations, and social events. These halls, often impressive buildings that reflected the guild's prosperity and status, served as visible symbols of the profession's importance within urban society. As you continue to relax, imagine the sense of pride a young barber surgeon might feel upon finally being accepted into the guild, the culmination of years of learning and practice. The community of practitioners provided both professional identity and practical support in an age before formal licensing or insurance. Feel yourself drifting deeper into relaxation as we continue our historical journey. Let us now immerse ourselves in the daily routine of a barber surgeon in a medieval town. As your mind creates this scene, allow yourself to sink deeper into comfort, visualizing these historical moments as your body relaxes. Dawn breaks over the thatched roofs and narrow streets. The barber surgeon rises with the sun, as do most townspeople in an age before artificial lighting made late nights practical. The morning bell from the parish church rings out, calling the faithful to early mass and signaling the start of the working day. In his modest home, often attached to or above his shop, the barber surgeon begins his day with a simple prayer, asking for steady hands and good judgment in his work. His wife is already heating water over the hearth fire for washing and cooking the morning meal. If he has children, they are stirring on their pallets or helping their mother with morning chores. His apprentice, who sleeps in a small chamber or perhaps in the shop itself, is already up and ready to assist with preparations for the day. After a simple breakfast of bread and ale or milk, he makes his way to his shop, located perhaps on a busy street or near the town's marketplace for maximum visibility. If the shop is not attached to his home, this short walk allows him to observe the town coming to life. Bakers pulling fresh loaves from ovens, merchants setting up market stalls, servants fetching water from the public well. First, he prepares his space for the day ahead. The apprentice has likely already swept the floor and lit the fire, but the master will personally inspect the shop to ensure everything is in order. Fresh rushes might be scattered on the floor, the hearth lit to provide warmth and hot water, and his instruments carefully arranged and checked for sharpness and cleanliness. He might sharpen his razors on a whetstone, then strop them on a leather belt to achieve the perfect edge for the day's shaving customers. Each stroke is deliberate and practiced, the result of years of experience. He tests the edge by shaving a small patch of hair from his forearm, or by seeing if the blade will cleanly slice through a hair held between his fingers. Meanwhile, his apprentice prepares shaving soap in a basin, mixing tallow or oil with lye, and perhaps adding aromatic herbs for a pleasant scent. Water is heated over the fire for creating lather and for cleaning instruments between customers. Towels and cloths are laid out, ready for use in both grooming and medical procedures. As the shop opens for business, the barber surgeon positions his pole outside the door or window, a signal to passers-by that the establishment is open. If the day is market day or follows a festival, he might expect more customers than usual, both for grooming services and for treating the aftermath of celebrations that perhaps involved too much ale or wine. Early morning often brings the wealthier clients, merchants or nobles who wish to be freshly groomed before conducting their business for the day. The barber offers them a seat, drapes a cloth around their shoulders, and prepares a lather of soap using water heated over the fire. With practiced hands, he shaves their faces, perhaps trims their hair, and engages in the latest town gossip, the barber's shop being a notorious center for news and rumors. Have you heard about the new taxes the Guild Council is proposing? A merchant might ask as the barber carefully navigates the razor around his chin. They say it will fund repairs to the East Gate, but my brother-in-law, who works for the steward, says most of it will go to new tapestries for the guild hall. The barber listens attentively, offering non-committal responses that won't offend any party but storing away the information to share with other customers throughout the day. For these higher status customers, the barber might offer additional grooming services, perfumed oils for the beard, hairstyling according to current fashions, or perhaps treatment for minor skin conditions with special ointments. These extras, charged at a premium, help supplement the basic income from standard haircuts and shaves. As the morning progresses, a mix of customers arrives. A craftsman might come in for a haircut, a housewife seeking treatment for her child's infected finger, a laborer with a nagging toothache that finally became unbearable. The barber surgeon shifts easily between these roles, groomer one moment, healer the next. For the child's infected finger, he might clean the wound with wine or vinegar, both containing natural antibacterial properties, though the barber wouldn't understand the science behind this. Then apply a poultice of herbs with drawing properties to help pull out the infection. Herbs like comfrey, known for its wound-healing properties, or calendula for its anti-inflammatory effects, might be mashed into a paste and applied directly to the wound. He wraps it carefully in clean linen that's giving instructions to the mother about keeping it dry and when to return for checking. Keep this covered and dry, he might instruct the mother. Wash it with wine each evening and apply fresh poultice. Come back in 3 days so I can see how it heals, or sooner if the redness spreads or the child develops a fever. His tone is authoritative but kind. He knows that clear instructions are essential for home care to be effective. The man with the toothache presents a different challenge. After examining the offending tooth and finding it beyond saving, the barber offers his patient a strong draught of alcohol to dull the pain, then takes up his dental forceps. The apprentice holds the patient's head steady as the barber positions the forceps, secures a grip on the painful tooth, and with quick, decisive movements born of years of practice, extracts the rotten tooth. He applies pressure to stop the bleeding and perhaps packs the socket with a bit of cloth soaked in clove oil to ease the pain and prevent infection. The patient, relieved despite the momentary pain, pays his fee and leaves with instructions to rinse with salt water and avoid hard foods for several days. The barber washes his instruments in hot water mixed with vinegar, preparing for the next patient. Midday might bring a scheduled bloodletting session for a regular client who believes in the preventative benefits of the procedure. The barber surgeon performs this common treatment with efficiency, tying the tourniquet, opening a vein with his lancet, carefully collecting the blood, monitoring his patient for signs of weakness, and finally applying pressure and a bandage when finished. The amount of blood drawn would depend on the patient's constitution and the purpose of the bloodletting. For preventative treatments, perhaps 4 to 8 ounces might be removed. For treating acute conditions like fever or inflammation, larger amounts might be taken, carefully monitored to avoid causing the patient to faint. After bloodletting, the barber might examine the drawn blood, noting its color, consistency, and how quickly it coagulates. These observations, interpreted through the lens of humoral theory, would inform his advice to the patient about diet and lifestyle to maintain proper balance. Your blood is darker than it should be, he might tell the patient, which suggests an excess of black bile. You should avoid heavy meats and wines for the next week and favor cooling foods like greens and fish to restore balance. The afternoon continues with more haircuts and shaves, interspersed with medical treatments. Perhaps a carpenter arrives with a deep cut from a slipped tool requiring cleaning and suturing. The barber examines the wound carefully, noting its depth and location, and determines that several stitches will be needed to close it properly. First, he cleans the wound thoroughly with wine, removing any debris or splinters that might cause infection. Then, threading a curved needle with silk or linen thread, he brings the edges of the wound together with neat, even stitches. His hands are steady and sure, the result of years of practice. The patient grimaces but endures, knowing that proper closure will promote healing and reduce scarring. Or a messenger comes from a wealthy household, summoning the barber surgeon to attend to a family member too ill to leave home, one of the early forms of what we might now call a house call. For these services to higher status households, The barber charges a premium fee, reflecting both the inconvenience of leaving his shop and the status of his client. If the day includes a visit to a wealthy home, the barber surgeon takes particular care with his appearance and manner. He might wear his best clothes, bring his finest instruments in a special case, and adopt more formal speech than he uses in his shop. These social adjustments reflect the complex social hierarchy of medieval society and the barber's position within it, above common laborers, but below the truly elite. Throughout the day, the apprentice assists at every stage, holding instruments, comforting patients, preparing materials, and cleaning up after procedures. Each task is a learning opportunity, a chance to observe the master's technique and gradually develop the skills needed for independent practice. The barber might take time between customers to teach specific techniques, explaining as he demonstrates the proper angle for a razor, the correct preparation of a particular herbal remedy, or the subtle signs that distinguish different types of skin conditions. These informal teaching moments, integrated into the daily workflow, form the heart of the apprenticeship system. As evening approaches, the barber surgeon might make house calls or attend to patients who couldn't come during working hours. He carries his tools in a leather case, ready to address whatever ailments he finds. For more serious cases, he might stay to monitor a patient after treatment, especially following surgery or significant bloodletting. These evening visits often have a different character than daytime work in the shop. In the quiet of a sick room, the barber might spend more time with each patient, observing symptoms carefully and providing comfort along with treatment. Without the pressure of waiting customers, he can afford to be more thorough in his care. When darkness falls, he returns to his shop to clean his instruments thoroughly, laying them out to dry overnight. Razors and lancets are carefully dried to prevent rusting. Surgical tools are cleaned with special attention to removing all blood and tissue, and everything is arranged in its proper place for the next day's work. He counts the day's earnings, a mixture of coins and perhaps goods received in barter from those unable to pay with money. A farmer might have brought eggs or cheese in payment for a tooth extraction. A weaver, perhaps a length of cloth in exchange for treating his child's wound. These non-monetary payments are a normal part of the medieval economy, especially among the lower classes. After closing the shop, the barber might spend the evening with his family, sharing the day's news and perhaps enjoying a slightly better meal than breakfast. Bread, cheese, vegetables from their garden, and meat if they can afford it. If literate, he might consult a medical text by candlelight, seeking information about a particularly puzzling case or refreshing his knowledge of treatments. Before retiring for the night, he might check on any instruments that need repair, make notes about supplies to purchase from the apothecary or prepare herbs from his garden for drying and storage. Even in these quiet evening hours, the work of maintaining his practice continues. Finally, as the town settles into darkness and the night watchman begins his rounds, the barber surgeon retires to bed, ready to begin again with the next dawn. His is a life of practical skill, community service, and constant learning through experience, a vital thread in the fabric of medieval healthcare. As you visualize this rhythm of medieval life, feel the gentle weight of history surrounding you like a comfortable blanket. The barber surgeon's day, filled with both mundane and dramatic moments, represents a crucial thread in the fabric of historical community healthcare. If you're still awake, notice how your breathing has naturally slowed, how each inhale and exhale carries you deeper into relaxation. And if you're enjoying this historical journey before sleep, remember to like and subscribe to Historical Slumbers for more soothing historical narratives. Now let's continue exploring the world of medieval medicine, before closing up and returning home, ready to begin again with the next dawn. As you visualize this rhythm of medieval life, feel the gentle weight of history surrounding you like a comfortable blanket. The barber surgeon's day, filled with both mundane and dramatic moments, represents a crucial thread in the fabric of historical community healthcare. If you're still awake, notice how your breathing has naturally slowed, how each inhale and exhale carries you deeper into relaxation. And if you're enjoying this historical journey before sleep, remember to like and subscribe to Historical Slumbers for more soothing historical narratives. Now, let's continue exploring the world of medieval medicine. While the town barber surgeon attended to everyday injuries and ailments, his skills were perhaps most crucially tested during times of war. Medieval and Renaissance battlefields were scenes of horrific injuries, and barber surgeons were often the only medical practitioners available to treat wounded soldiers. As you continue to relax deeply, imagine a military encampment on the eve of battle. Among the tents and campfires, the barber surgeons prepare for the grim work that will follow the next day's fighting. They sharpen their instruments, prepare bandages, and mix poultices and tinctures that will be needed for treating wounds. Military service provided both challenges and opportunities for barber surgeons. The dangers were considerable. They worked close to battlefields and could become casualties themselves. Living conditions were often harsh, with exposure to the elements, poor sanitation, and the constant risk of disease that plagued medieval armies. Yet service in war also offered valuable experience that could advance a barber surgeon's skills and reputation more quickly than years of civilian practice. Some barber surgeons served permanently with standing armies or in the retinue of noble houses, while others were essentially civilians drafted or hired for specific campaigns. By the late medieval period, larger armies typically included a hierarchical medical staff, with a chief surgeon overseeing several barber surgeons and their assistants. Payment arrangements varied widely. Some received regular wages, while others were paid per treatment or worked partly for a share of plunder. A particularly skilled barber surgeon might secure patronage from a wealthy knight or commander, receiving protection and financial security in exchange for prioritizing that patron's care. The day before battle, the barber surgeons would meet with military commanders to establish the location for their field hospital, ideally a spot with access to clean water, some natural protection from the elements, and a clear evacuation route. They would prepare this area with whatever resources were available, perhaps setting up tents or claiming an abandoned building or barn. Inside this makeshift hospital, they would arrange their equipment for maximum efficiency: bandages and suture materials within easy reach, cauterizing irons ready to be heated in fires, and basins for washing wounds. Barrels of wine or vinegar would be stationed nearby for cleaning injuries, and containers of water for drinking and washing. Unlike their civilian counterparts, military barber surgeons specialized in treating the types of injuries common in warfare: deep cuts from swords and axes, puncture wounds from arrows and lances, crushing injuries from maces and warhammers, and, in later periods, gunshot wounds. They became experts in amputation, often the only option for severely damaged limbs in an era before antibiotics could combat infection. Experience taught them which wounds were survivable and which were not, allowing them to focus their limited resources on those they could help. They learned to identify the signs of internal bleeding, penetrating wounds to vital organs, and other conditions beyond their ability to treat, offering palliative care and comfort to those who could not be saved. When battle commenced, these practitioners would typically remain behind the lines, setting up treatment areas where the wounded could be brought. As the casualties arrived, carried by comrades or sometimes dragging themselves from the field, the barber surgeons would work with remarkable speed, assessing injuries and providing treatment according to a rough system of triage, though not yet formalized as it would be in later centuries. Imagine the scene. Wounded men arrive continuously, some walking, others carried on makeshift stretchers. The air fills with groans and cries of pain. The ground becomes muddy with blood and trampled earth. Amid this chaos, the barber surgeons work methodically, moving from patient to patient, making quick decisions about who can be saved and what treatments to apply. For less severe wounds, treatment might involve cleaning with wine or vinegar, both containing natural antiseptic properties, removing any foreign objects like splinters or arrowheads, and closing the wound with sutures if necessary. Poultices of herbs with coagulant or anti-inflammatory properties might be applied, followed by bandaging. Arrow wounds presented particular challenges. Medieval arrows were designed with barbed heads that would catch in flesh if pulled directly out. Removing them required special tools and techniques. The barber surgeon might enlarge the entry wound with a knife, then use arrow forceps, specialized tools with long, narrow jaws, to grasp the arrowhead and extract it along its entry path. Alternatively, for deeply embedded arrows, they might push the arrow completely through the body part, breaking off the head and then withdrawing the shaft from the other side, a painful but sometimes necessary procedure. Sword and axe wounds typically created deep cuts that required thorough cleaning and suturing. The barber surgeon would irrigate these wounds with wine or vinegar, remove any foreign material and devitalize tissue, then close them with sutures of silk, linen, or animal sinew. The choice of suture material often depended on what was available and the location of the wound. More severe injuries often required amputation, particularly if a limb was crushed or a wound showed signs of gangrene. The barber surgeon worked quickly, using tourniquets to control bleeding and perhaps offering the patient strong alcohol or opium if available. With assistants holding the patient down, he would use a sharp knife to cut through skin and muscle to the bone, then a saw to remove the limb. The resulting stump would be cauterized with a hot iron to seal bleeding vessels, then dressed with bandages. The speed of these battlefield amputations was legendary, sometimes under a minute from first cut to cauterization, as the barber surgeon knew that speed meant less blood loss and less suffering for the patient. This focus on speed over precision or sterilization seems brutal to modern sensibilities, but in context, it saved many lives that would otherwise have been lost. A skilled military barber surgeon developed specialized techniques for battlefield injuries. For puncture wounds that penetrated the chest cavity, causing the lung to collapse, he might insert a hollow tube to release trapped air and allow the lung to re-expand. For abdominal wounds with protruding intestines, he would clean the exposed organs with warm wine before carefully returning them to the abdominal cavity and suturing the wound closed. Barber surgeons also became adept at removing arrows and crossbow bolts, complicated procedures if the missile was barbed or had penetrated deeply. Special extractors were developed, allowing them to remove these projectiles while minimizing additional damage to surrounding tissue. By the 16th century, gunpowder weapons presented new challenges. Gunshot wounds were particularly difficult to treat. They created messy, contaminated wounds prone to infection, and the lead balls often fragmented or carried clothing and dirt deep into the body. Barber surgeons developed new techniques to deal with these injuries, including specialized tools for extracting bullets. One prevailing theory of the time, based on the writings of Giovanni da Vigo, held that gunpowder itself poisoned wounds. This led to the practice of cauterizing gunshot wounds with boiling oil to neutralize this poison, an excruciating treatment. It was the famous French barber surgeon Ambroise Paré who discovered, when he ran out of hot oil during a battle, that wounds treated more gently with a soothing balm actually healed better. This discovery represents one of the earliest documented examples of what we would now call evidence-based medicine. Beyond treating physical wounds, military barber surgeons also addressed ailments common in army camps: dysentery from contaminated water, respiratory infections from exposure to the elements, and various fevers that spread rapidly through crowded military encampments. Their treatments, based on humoral theory and practical experience, included herbal preparations, dietary recommendations, and sometimes bloodletting. After major battles, barber surgeons often worked continuously for days, catching sleep in brief intervals between waves of casualties. The conditions were grueling, operating by candlelight or in the open air, with limited clean water and a rapidly dwindling supply of medicines and materials. The mortality rate for serious wounds remained high despite their best efforts. Infection was the greatest killer, with tetanus, gangrene, and sepsis claiming many who survived the initial trauma. Without understanding of germ theory or access to antibiotics, even the most skilled barber surgeon could do little once infection took hold, though they did observe that clean wounds and good wound closure improved survival chances. For those who survived the immediate treatment, longer-term care included changing bandages, monitoring for infection, and eventually rehabilitation. Soldiers with amputated limbs might be fitted with crude prosthetics, wooden peg legs or hook hands, that allowed some return to functionality, though nothing approaching modern prosthetic capabilities. The experience gained on battlefields often advanced surgical knowledge and techniques, which would eventually be brought back to civilian practice when the fighting ended. Many of the most famous barber surgeons in history, like Ambroise Paré in 16th century France, developed their revolutionary techniques while treating soldiers. Paré, who began his career as a barber surgeon's apprentice, served in numerous military campaigns and eventually became surgeon to 4 French kings. His innovations included the use of ligatures to tie off blood vessels instead of cauterization, the development of more sophisticated artificial limbs, and the reintroduction of podalic version, turning a fetus in the womb to facilitate delivery for complicated childbirths. As your body continues to relax deeply, consider how these battlefield practitioners, working under the most difficult conditions imaginable, contributed to the evolution of surgical techniques that would eventually develop into modern trauma medicine. Their practical innovations, born of necessity and observation rather than academic theory, formed an essential bridge between ancient medical knowledge and the emergence of modern surgical practice. Take another deep breath now, feeling how comfortable your body has become. If you're still awake and enjoying this historical journey, remember that liking this video helps others find our channel. Now let's continue our exploration of medieval medicine by examining another crucial aspect of healthcare in this period. While barber surgery was predominantly a male profession in medieval Europe, women played crucial roles in healthcare as midwives, herbalists, and informal healers. Their contributions often intersected with and complemented the work of barber surgeons. As you continue to drift towards sleep, let's explore the parallel world of women healers who shared the medieval medical landscape with barber surgeons. Midwifery was perhaps the most formalized female healing role, with midwives attending the vast majority of births across all social classes. These women learned their craft through apprenticeship, much like barber surgeons, often training under an experienced midwife for years before practicing independently. The role of midwife carried significant responsibility and social recognition. In many communities, midwives were respected figures whose knowledge extended beyond childbirth to include general women's health, infant care, and sometimes aspects of general medicine. Their expertise was recognized even by male medical practitioners, who generally avoided involvement in the female-dominated sphere of childbirth except in emergencies. Medieval society considered childbirth a natural process best handled by women, both for practical knowledge and for modesty's sake. The intimate nature of birth, combined with religious and cultural taboos around female bodies, meant that women were generally more comfortable with female attendants. Even the church, which restricted women from many roles, acknowledged midwifery as an appropriate and necessary female occupation. Midwives were often older women who had borne children themselves and assisted at many births before taking on the role independently. This experiential knowledge was considered essential. Theoretical understanding meant little compared to practical skills in managing the various complications that might arise during labor and delivery. Imagine a midwife's chamber during a birth in a medieval town. The room would be kept warm, with fresh straw or rushes on the floor, clean linens prepared, and hot water readily available. Female relatives and neighbors might be present to provide support, while men, including the father, were typically excluded from the birthing room. Windows might be covered and doors sealed with cloth to prevent drafts, as medieval medicine considered cold air dangerous to both mother and newborn. Candles or oil lamps would provide light, often with specific herbs burned to purify the air or ease pain. The room might be decorated with religious items, perhaps a crucifix or image of Saint Margaret, patron saint of childbirth, to provide spiritual protection. The midwife would have brought her birthing stool, a horseshoe-shaped seat that allowed the mother to deliver in a sitting position, using gravity to assist, along with various herbs and tinctures to ease pain or stimulate contractions. Ergot, derived from a fungus that grows on rye, might be administered to strengthen contractions or stop postpartum hemorrhage, though its use required careful judgment due to toxic effects if improperly dosed. She would rely on knowledge passed down through generations, using techniques refined by centuries of practical experience. By feeling the mother's abdomen, she could determine the baby's position and presentation. Through vaginal examination, she could assess the progress of labor and the dilation of the cervix. Her experience would help her recognize when labor was progressing normally and when complications might require intervention. For normal births, the midwife's role was largely supportive, encouraging the mother through contractions, suggesting position changes to ease the baby's passage, and ensuring proper breathing techniques. When complications arose, she would draw on specific skills to address them. If a baby presented in breech position, feet or buttocks first rather than head, an experienced midwife knew techniques for turning the infant externally by manipulating the mother's abdomen or for safely delivering a breech baby without causing injury. For a transverse lie, baby positioned horizontally, she might attempt to turn the baby manually or recognize when more drastic intervention was needed. After delivery, the midwife would cut the umbilical cord, deliver the placenta, ensuring it was complete to prevent dangerous retained tissue, and check the mother for excessive bleeding. She would clean and swaddle the newborn, check for any abnormalities, and help establish breastfeeding if the mother intended to nurse. Her care continued in the days following birth, with regular visits to check the mother's recovery and the baby's well-being. She would watch for signs of childbed fever, puerperal sepsis, advise on infant feeding and care, and provide herbal remedies for common postpartum complaints like breast engorgement or perineal pain. Only in cases of severe complications would a barber surgeon be called to the birthing chamber, typically for situations requiring surgery, such as when a baby could not be delivered naturally. This intersection represented one of the few areas where male and female healing domains overlapped in medieval society. When a barber surgeon was summoned to a difficult birth, the situation was already dire. He might attempt to extract a dead fetus using specialized hooks or forceps to save the mother's life. In extreme cases, cesarean sections might be performed, though almost exclusively after the mother's death, in an attempt to save the child for baptism. The survival rate for the mother in cesarean deliveries was virtually zero until the modern era. This collaboration between midwives and barber surgeons, while rare, demonstrates how different healing traditions could complement each other in medical crises. The midwife's extensive experience with normal birth and minor complications, combined with the barber surgeon's surgical intervention for the most severe cases, created a rudimentary but functional system of obstetric care. Beyond midwifery, many women served as herbalists and informal healers within their communities. They grew medicinal gardens, prepared remedies, and treated common ailments among family and neighbors. Their knowledge of plant medicines was extensive and practical, addressing everything from fevers and digestive complaints to wounds and women's health issues. These female healers often specialized in areas considered appropriate for women, treating children's illnesses, managing women's reproductive health concerns, and providing care for the elderly. Their remedies drew on a complex understanding of local plants and their properties, knowledge typically passed from mother to daughter or between women in a community. The cottage garden of a medieval female healer might contain dozens of medicinal plants, common herbs like sage, rosemary, and thyme for everyday cooking and minor ailments, specialized medicinals like foxglove for heart conditions, and protective plants like rue believed to ward off illness and evil influences. The cultivation, harvesting, and preparation of these plants followed specific traditions regarding timing, methods, and appropriate combinations. Some of these women became known for particular healing specialties, setting bones, treating eye conditions, or curing specific diseases. They rarely received formal recognition or compensation like male practitioners, but their skills were valued and sought after nonetheless. The relationship between these female healers and barber surgeons was complex. In some communities, they worked cooperatively, recognizing each other's different areas of expertise. A barber surgeon might refer women with reproductive complaints to a female healer, while a midwife might call a barber surgeon for cases requiring surgical intervention. In other contexts, particularly as male-dominated guilds grew more powerful, Women healers faced increasing restrictions and sometimes accusations of witchcraft if their remedies seemed too effective or mysterious. The gradual professionalization of medicine, with its emphasis on university training inaccessible to women, began to marginalize female practitioners despite their practical skills and community importance. By the late medieval period, some cities began to issue licenses to female healers, particularly midwives, providing official recognition of their role while also bringing them under regulatory control. In London, for example, midwives had to be licensed by the bishop, swearing an oath that outlined both professional standards and religious obligations, including the proper baptism of infants in emergency situations. These licensed women occupied a unique middle ground in the medieval healthcare system, neither fully accepted as equals to male practitioners nor completely excluded from legitimate practice. Their services remained essential, especially in women's health, yet their status diminished as medicine became increasingly professionalized and institutionalized. The gradual decline in status of female healers mirrored broader social changes. As universities expanded and guild structures strengthened, the informal, experience-based learning that had characterized women's healing traditions became devalued in favor of formal, text-based education available primarily to men. What had once been respected as women's wisdom began to be dismissed as superstition or folk practice. This transition was neither sudden nor complete. In rural areas particularly, traditional female healers continued to practice well into the modern era, maintaining knowledge and techniques that sometimes preserved effective treatments unknown to academic medicine. The herbal remedies used by these women healers, originally dismissed by professional medicine, have in some cases been validated by modern pharmacological research. As you continue to relax deeply, consider how these different healing traditions, the barber surgeon with his razors and lancets, the midwife with her birthing stool and herbal remedies, created a patchwork of care that served medieval communities in the absence of formal medical systems. The complementary knowledge of male and female practitioners, each with their own domains of expertise, provided a more comprehensive approach to health than either could have offered alone. If you're still awake, take a moment to notice how comfortable your body feels now, how each breath carries you deeper into relaxation. And if you're enjoying this historical bedtime story, remember that subscribing to Historical Slumbers will bring more soothing historical narratives to help you drift off to sleep. Now, let's continue our journey through medieval medicine. Where did the barber surgeon fit within the complex social hierarchy of medieval society? As you continue to relax, let's explore the social position of these versatile practitioners who straddled the worlds of trade and medicine. Barber surgeons occupied a curious middle ground in medieval social structure. They were certainly not nobility or clergy, but neither were they simple laborers. Instead, they belonged to the artisan class, skilled craftspeople whose specialized knowledge gave them a degree of respect and status above common workers. In larger towns and cities, membership in the Barber Surgeons Guild further enhanced their standing. Guild membership signified professional recognition and brought certain privileges, including the right to practice their craft without interference and to participate in civic events as a recognized group. The public nature of the barber's shop made these practitioners well-known figures in their communities. As centers for news and gossip, as well as grooming and healthcare, barbershops were social hubs where people from different social strata might interact, giving the barber surgeon a unique window into the lives of the diverse community members. Financially, successful barber surgeons could achieve a comfortable living, particularly in larger towns or if they secured wealthy patrons. They typically charged according to the complexity of the procedure and the social status of the client, with a sliding scale that made basic care accessible even to poorer citizens. Payment might be made in currency for wealthier clients, or through barter of goods and services for those of more modest means. Imagine a barber surgeon's ledger recording the day's transactions, a few pennies for shaving a merchant, a chicken in exchange for pulling a farmer's tooth, perhaps a more substantial sum for treating a noble's gout or performing bloodletting for a prosperous guild master. This mixture of monetary and non-monetary compensation reflected the barber surgeon's position bridging different social worlds. The barber surgeon's relationship with university-trained physicians was often tense and complicated. Physicians, with their Latin texts and theoretical education, looked down upon the practical, hands-on work of barber surgeons, considering it beneath their dignity. Yet they also depended on barber surgeons to carry out the physical treatments they prescribed, creating an uncomfortable interdependence. In the medical hierarchy, physicians claimed the highest position, followed by guild surgeons who performed more complex operations but did not cut hair, and then barber surgeons. At the bottom were itinerant practitioners like tooth pullers and bone setters who traveled from town to town, often working at fairs and markets without guild membership or formal recognition. Despite their subordinate position to physicians in theory, barber surgeons were often more trusted by ordinary people. Their accessibility, practical skills, and integration into community life made them familiar figures to whom people turned in times of need. While a physician might be called to attend a wealthy merchant or noble, the barber surgeon treated everyone from apprentices to shopkeepers to laborers, forming the backbone of medieval urban healthcare. As you continue to relax, imagine a respected barber surgeon walking through the streets of his town, greeted by former patients, exchanging news with fellow tradespeople, perhaps stopping to examine a child's rash at a mother's request. A figure whose practical knowledge and steady hands made him an essential thread in the fabric of medieval community life. As the medieval period progressed into the early modern era, roughly 1700, the practice of barber surgery began to undergo significant changes, influenced by growing medical knowledge, increasing regulation, and the gradual separation of barbering from surgical practice. Take a deep breath now, feeling your body become heavier and more relaxed as we explore this transitional period in medical history. By the 16th century, the growing influence of Renaissance thinking was affecting all aspects of European society, including medicine. The revival of classical learning and new emphasis on direct observation began to challenge ancient medical theories. Anatomical knowledge improved dramatically through the work of individuals like Andreas Vesalius, whose detailed anatomical illustrations based on actual human dissections provided new insights into the structure of the human body. Barber surgeons were influenced by these developments to varying degrees. While they remained primarily practical rather than theoretical practitioners, the more ambitious among them began to study anatomy more systematically, sometimes attending public dissections or reading newly published anatomical texts if they were literate. Formal regulation of medical practice also increased during this period. In London, for example, the Company of Barber Surgeons, formed by the merger of the Barbers' Company and the Fellowship of Surgeons in 1540, received a royal charter from Henry VIII that outlined specific rights and responsibilities. The charter granted members the right to dissect a limited number of executed criminals each year for anatomical study, a significant privilege that acknowledged the importance of anatomical knowledge for surgical practice. Similar regulatory developments occurred across Europe with varying details, but a common trend toward greater oversight of who could practice medicine and surgery and what qualifications they needed to demonstrate. Imagine a meeting of a barber surgeons guild in a 16th century city. The members gather in their guild hall, perhaps seated beneath a painted coat of arms showing their traditional symbols. They discuss recent regulations from the city council, examine the work of apprentices seeking to advance to journeyman status, and perhaps watch a demonstration of a new surgical technique by a master who has recently returned from studying in another city. During this period, specialization within the field began to increase. Some barber surgeons focused more on specific types of procedures, eye operations, bone setting, or dental work, developing particular expertise that set them apart from general practitioners. Others began to emphasize either the barbering or surgical aspects of the profession, foreshadowing the eventual split that would occur. This specialization was particularly evident in military medicine, where barber surgeons assigned to armies gained extensive experience with traumatic injuries and developed innovative techniques out of necessity. Ambroise Paré, perhaps the most famous barber surgeon in history, revolutionized the treatment of gunshot wounds and amputations during his service with French armies in the mid-16th century. Abandoning the traditional practice of cauterizing gunshot wounds with boiling oil, Paré instead developed a soothing balm of egg yolks, rose oil, and turpentine that proved far more effective, an early example of evidence-based medicine emerging from practical observation. As your body continues to relax deeply, consider how this period of transition reflects broader patterns in human knowledge, the tension between traditional practices and new discoveries, the gradual accumulation of empirical evidence leading to improved techniques, and the ongoing process of specialization that characterizes the development of most professions. If you're still with me, take a moment to check that you're in a comfortable position, perhaps adjust your blanket or pillow if needed. And if you're finding this historical journey soothing, remember to like the video and subscribe to Historical Slumbers for more. Now, let's continue exploring the fascinating world of medieval and early modern medicine. Throughout the long history of barber surgery, certain practitioners distinguish themselves through innovation, skill, or influence. As you continue to relax deeply, let's explore the stories of some notable barber surgeons whose contributions helped shape the evolution of medicine. Ambroise Paré, whom we mentioned earlier, stands as perhaps the most famous barber surgeon in history. Born in France around 1510 to humble origins, Paré began his career as an apprentice barber surgeon before joining the army as a battlefield surgeon. It was there, amid the chaos and horrific injuries of 16th century warfare, that he made some of his most significant innovations. Imagine a military field hospital in the 1530s. The air is thick with the smell of blood and smoke. Wounded soldiers cry out in pain, and surgeons work frantically to save those they can. The standard treatment for gunshot wounds at this time was to pour boiling oil into the wound to cauterize it, an excruciating procedure based on the mistaken belief that gunpowder poisoned wounds. During one battle, Paré ran out of the traditional boiling oil and was forced to improvise, creating a soothing mixture of egg yolks, rose oil, and turpentine instead. To his surprise, patients treated with this gentler remedy recovered better than those who received the standard treatment. This experience taught him the value of observation over tradition, leading him to question and improve upon many accepted medical practices of his time. Paré went on to develop numerous innovations. He reintroduced the use of ligatures, tying off blood vessels instead of cauterization during amputations, designed prosthetic limbs and eyes, invented several surgical instruments, and wrote influential texts that were translated into multiple languages. Though he began as a humble barber surgeon with little formal education, Paré eventually became surgeon to 4 French kings and earned the Latin motto that appeared on his coat of arms: Je le pensais, Dieu le guarit. I dressed him, God healed him, a humble acknowledgement of the limits of medical intervention. In England, Richard Ferris emerged as another influential figure. Serving as barber surgeon to Queen Elizabeth I in the late 16th century, Ferris helped elevate the status of surgeons through his court position and his efforts to improve surgical education. As a leader in the company of barber surgeons, he advocated for higher standards of training and played a role in the gradual process of distinguishing surgery as a profession separate from barbering. Across the Channel in the Netherlands, Fabricius Hildanus, Wilhelm Fabry, practiced as a barber surgeon while making significant contributions to surgical knowledge. Born in 1560, Hildanus carefully documented his cases and surgical techniques, producing detailed illustrations and descriptions that helped standardize procedures. His 6-volume Observationum et Curationum Chirurgicarum Centuriae contained hundreds of case studies, making him one of the first surgeons to systematically record and share clinical experiences. As the scientific revolution gathered momentum in the 17th century, many barber surgeons embraced the new emphasis on observation and experimentation. In France, Pierre Dionys combined his practical work as a surgeon with anatomical lectures at the Jardin au Roi in Paris, helping to bridge the gap between theoretical and practical medical knowledge. As you continue to drift towards sleep, consider how these individuals working in a profession often considered inferior to university medicine, nonetheless drove significant medical innovations through their practical experience and willingness to challenge tradition when evidence suggested better approaches. The unified profession of barber surgery eventually split into its component parts, a separation that occurred gradually across Europe, though at different times in different regions. As you continue to relax deeply, let's explore this pivotal transition that led to our modern distinction between barbers and surgeons. The seeds of separation were planted during the Renaissance, as surgical knowledge expanded and surgical practitioners increasingly sought greater status and recognition for their specialized skills. Surgeons, particularly those who focused exclusively on complex operations rather than routine barbering, began to distance themselves from what they saw as the more mundane aspects of the combined profession. In France, a significant step towards separation occurred in 1660, when King Louis XIV issued an edict that officially distinguished surgeons from barbers. The edict created two separate groups: surgeon barbers, who could perform both surgery and barbering, and barber wig makers, who were limited to haircutting, shaving, and wig making. This legal distinction reflected the growing social distinction between the two aspects of the traditional practice. As you visualize this transitional period, imagine a French surgeon in the late 17th century, perhaps trained in the new surgical academy established in Paris, wearing the long robes associated with learned professions, rather than the apron of a tradesman. He examines a patient alongside a physician, their relationship now more collegial than hierarchical. While across town, a barber focuses solely on grooming services, the medical instruments that once occupied his shop now absent. In England, the formal separation came in 1745, when the surgeons broke away from the United Company of Barber Surgeons to form their own company of surgeons, which would later become the Royal College of Surgeons. This split left barbers with the right to perform only minor procedures like tooth drawing and bloodletting, while more complex surgical operations became the exclusive domain of members of the new surgical company. The physical symbol of this division appeared in the barber pole itself. In England, legislation specified that barbers should display only poles with a single helix of red and white, while surgeons could display poles with a double helix. Over time, as barbers ceased performing even minor medical procedures, the medical symbolism of the pole was largely forgotten by the public, becoming simply a trademark of the barbering profession. This separation reflected broader social and intellectual changes in European society. The Enlightenment emphasis on specialized knowledge and professional identity accelerated the division between trades and professions. Surgery, with its growing foundation in anatomical science, increasingly aligned itself with medicine as an intellectual pursuit, rather than with barbering as a manual craft. For ordinary people, this separation often meant less accessible surgical care, as surgeons, now with higher status and more formal training, typically charged more for their services and were fewer in number than the barber surgeons had been. The gap would eventually be filled by hospitals and, much later, by modern healthcare systems. But during the transitional period, many communities likely experienced reduced access to surgical interventions. As you continue to relax deeply, consider how this historical division shaped our modern understanding of these professions. The skilled surgeon performing delicate operations in a sterile operating theater and the barber styling hair in a neighborhood shop now seem worlds apart. Yet for centuries, these roles were united in the person of the barber surgeon, a reminder of how our modern professional categories are not natural divisions but historical developments. If you're still awake, take a moment to notice how relaxed your body feels now. Each breath carries you deeper into comfort. And if you're enjoying this historical journey, remember to like this video and subscribe to Historical Slumbers for more soothing historical narratives. Now let's continue exploring the legacy of barber surgeons. Though the unified profession of barber surgery eventually disappeared, its influence continues to echo through modern healthcare in surprising ways. As you drift towards sleep, let's explore the lasting legacy of these versatile practitioners. Perhaps the most direct legacy of barber surgeons is in the profession of surgery itself. Modern surgeons, with their emphasis on practical skill, manual dexterity, and learning through apprenticeship, now called residency, are in many ways the spiritual descendants of barber surgeons rather than of academic physicians. The barber surgeon's practical hands-on approach to healing, focusing on what worked rather than on theoretical purity, laid the groundwork for surgery's eventual emergence as a respected medical specialty. Imagine a modern operating room with its carefully arranged instruments, specialized lighting, and team of skilled professionals. While the technology would astonish a medieval barber surgeon, many fundamental aspects would be recognizable. The emphasis on precise manual technique, the specialized tools designed for specific procedures, the focus on anatomy, and the direct intervention to repair the body. These continuities connect modern surgical practice to its barber surgical roots. The tradition of apprenticeship learning, watching, then assisting, then performing under supervision, remains central to surgical education, echoing how barber surgeons trained their apprentices for centuries. Even the somewhat hierarchical structure of surgical teams, with attending surgeons, residents, and medical students each having defined roles, has parallels to the master journeyman apprentice structure of medieval guilds. Another significant legacy lies in the democratization of healthcare. Barber surgeons provided medical services to ordinary people who could never have afforded the attention of university-trained physicians. This tradition of making practical healthcare available to broader populations continues in modern primary care and community medicine, where accessibility remains a central value. The barber surgeon's dual role as medical practitioner and community figure who maintained connections with patients outside of treatment contexts also foreshadowed aspects of modern family medicine and community healthcare. Today's emphasis on knowing patients in their social context, understanding their lifestyle and constraints, and building ongoing relationships rather than simply treating isolated symptoms has more in common with the barber surgeon's approach than with the more detached theoretical medicine of medieval physicians. Even some specific techniques pioneered by barber surgeons have evolved into modern practices. Bloodletting, while no longer practiced as a general cure, survives in modified form in therapeutic phlebotomy, used to treat conditions like hemochromatosis, iron overload, and polycythemia, excess red blood cells. The cupping techniques once used by barber surgeons continue to be used in some physical therapy and alternative medicine practices. The barber pole itself remains perhaps the most visible legacy, a colorful reminder of this vanished profession that once played such a crucial role in community healthcare. Though few modern barbers know the bloody origins of their trade symbol, it stands as a tangible connection to centuries of practical healing that helped shape the development of modern medicine. As your mind drifts with these historical connections, consider how the practical wisdom of barber surgeons, their emphasis on observation, hands-on skill, and pragmatic solutions, continues to influence healthcare even in our technologically advanced age. The red and white stripes of the barber pole serve as a reminder that medicine has always been both an art and a science, requiring both theoretical knowledge and practical skill. While we often focus on the limitations and misconceptions of medieval medicine, the humoral theory, the lack of germ awareness, the absence of anesthesia, barber surgeons and other medieval practitioners actually developed many effective treatments through empirical observation, even without understanding the underlying mechanisms. As you continue to relax deeply, let's explore some aspects of medieval practice that align surprisingly well with modern medical understanding. The use of alcoholic spirits, vinegar, and honey to clean wounds might have seemed simply pragmatic to medieval healers, but we now recognize these substances have genuine antimicrobial properties. A barber surgeon washing a cut with wine was unknowingly applying ethanol to reduce bacterial contamination, centuries before the germ theory of disease would provide a scientific explanation for why this worked. Similarly, many herbal remedies used by medieval practitioners have been shown to contain active medicinal compounds. Willow bark, used for pain relief, contains salicylic acid, the precursor to aspirin. Moldy bread applied to infected wounds sometimes contained early forms of antibiotics, predating Alexander Fleming's discovery of penicillin by centuries. Foxglove, used for certain heart conditions, contains digitalin, still used in heart medications today. The barber surgeon's technique of suturing wounds closed has remained essentially unchanged in principle, though with improved materials and sterilization. Their basic understanding of the need to clean wounds, stop bleeding, close dead space, and protect the wound during healing aligns with modern wound management principles. Even bloodletting, perhaps the most iconic and now discredited medieval practice, had limited legitimate applications. For congestive heart failure, removing blood volume could temporarily reduce strain on the heart, a crude precursor to modern diuretic therapy. For hemochromatosis, iron overload disease, bloodletting remains the primary treatment even today. Medieval practitioners also recognized the importance of diet in health and healing, prescribing specific foods for different conditions. While their explanations relied on humoral theory rather than nutrition science, many of their dietary recommendations align surprisingly well with modern nutritional understanding. Mental health, too, received attention from medieval healers who recognized connections between mental and physical well-being long before modern psychosomatic medicine. Many monasteries and hospitals provided calming environments, music therapy, meaningful work, and social connection for those with mental illness, approaches that resonate with some aspects of modern psychiatric care. The barber surgeon's practical approach, focusing on what worked rather than rigid adherence to theory, sometimes led to better outcomes than the more theory-bound practices of university physicians. This empirical methodology, refined over generations of practice, occasionally stumbled upon effective treatments that would later be explained by scientific advances. As you drift closer to sleep, consider how this historical perspective might help us maintain humility about our current medical understanding. Like our medieval predecessors, we likely hold some misconceptions that future generations will recognize as flawed. The story of medicine is one of continuous discovery and refinement, with each era building upon and sometimes correcting the knowledge of those who came before. If you're still with me, notice how heavy your eyelids feel now, how peaceful your breathing has become. If you're enjoying this historical journey before sleep, remember to subscribe to Historical Slumbers for more soothing historical narratives. Now, let's begin to bring our exploration to a gentle close. Where did the barber surgeon fit within the complex social hierarchy of medieval society? As you continue to relax, let's explore the social position of these versatile practitioners who straddled the worlds of trade and medicine. Medieval European society was organized around a rigid hierarchical structure, traditionally conceived as three estates: those who pray, the clergy; those who fight, the nobility; and those who work, peasants and craftspeople. This simplified model, however, fails to capture the nuanced reality of urban life, where a growing middle class of merchants and craftspeople occupied various levels of status and influence. Barber surgeons occupied a curious middle ground in this social structure. They were certainly not nobility or clergy, but neither were they simple laborers. Instead, they belonged to the artisan class, skilled craftspeople whose specialized knowledge gave them a degree of respect and status above common workers. Their social position was ambiguous in many ways. Unlike university-educated physicians who enjoyed high status through their association with scholarly learning and Latin literacy, barber surgeons were craftsmen who learned through apprenticeship rather than formal education. Yet their essential services and practical skills elevated them above many other trades. The barber surgeon's work involved intimate physical contact with people across social classes, from shaving a nobleman's face to extracting a peasant's tooth. This physical intimacy with bodies, combined with their role in bloodletting and surgery, placed them in a category somewhat apart from other craftspeople. Their work made them both necessary and slightly suspect. Touching blood and bodily fluids carried associations of ritual impurity in some contexts. In larger towns and cities, membership in the Barber Surgeons Guild further enhanced their standing. Guild membership signified professional recognition and brought certain privileges, including the right to practice their craft without interference and to participate in civic events as a recognized group. Guilds were not merely professional associations, but significant political and social entities within medieval towns. Guild members often served on town councils, participated in municipal governance, and played prominent roles in community festivals and religious processions. A successful barber surgeon might ascend to leadership positions within the guild, further elevating his social standing and political influence. The visible symbols of guild membership, special clothing for official functions, banners carried in processions, and designated seating in church, publicly demonstrated the barber surgeon's place within respectable society. In religious processions that reflected the social hierarchy, the Barber Surgeons Guild would march in a position that reflected their middling but respectable status, above common laborers but below merchants, and certainly below the truly elite. The public nature of the barber's shop made these practitioners well-known figures in their communities. As centers for news and gossip, as well as grooming and healthcare, barbershops were social hubs where people from different social strata might interact, giving the barber surgeon a unique window into the lives of diverse community members. Unlike many medieval professions where practitioners rarely interacted with those outside their immediate social circle, the barber surgeon regularly dealt with customers across the social spectrum. A successful practitioner needed to navigate these interactions adeptly, knowing how to show appropriate deference to social superiors while maintaining professional dignity with all clients. This regular contact with different social classes gave barber surgeons unusual social intelligence and adaptability. They learned to modulate their language and manner according to the status of the client, using more formal, respectful address with nobles and wealthy merchants, and a more direct, familiar approach with craftspeople and laborers. This social flexibility was itself a valuable skill in rigidly stratified medieval society. The barber surgeon's unique access to information further enhanced his social importance. Through conversations with diverse clients, he gathered news and rumors from all quarters of the town. This made the barber's shop an informal clearinghouse for information, a place where one might learn about political developments, business opportunities, or personal scandals. Financially, successful barber surgeons could achieve a comfortable living, particularly in larger towns, or if they secured wealthy patrons. They typically charged according to the complexity of the procedure and the social status of the client, with a sliding scale that made basic care accessible even to poorer citizens. Payment might be made in currency for wealthier clients, or through barter of goods and services for those of more modest means. The practice of charging different rates based on social status was common across medieval trades and services. A haircut and shave might cost a wealthy merchant several times what a laborer would pay for the same service, reflecting not just the client's ability to pay, but also recognition of social hierarchy. This differential pricing actually helped make healthcare more accessible across social classes, as it allowed barber surgeons to subsidize treatments for poorer clients with higher fees from the wealthy. Income levels varied widely among barber surgeons, influenced by location, reputation, and clientele. A practitioner in a major urban center with noble patrons might achieve considerable prosperity, owning a substantial townhouse, employing several apprentices and assistants, and even making financial investments in property or trade ventures. A village barber surgeon, in contrast, might live modestly, perhaps supplementing his income with small-scale farming or other trades. Imagine a barber surgeon's ledger, recording the day's transactions, a few pennies for shaving a merchant, a chicken in exchange for pulling a farmer's tooth, perhaps a more substantial sum for treating a noble's gout or performing bloodletting for a prosperous guildmaster. This mixture of monetary and non-monetary compensation reflected the barber surgeon's position, bridging different social worlds. The barber surgeon's relationship with university-trained physicians was often tense and complicated. Physicians, with their Latin texts and theoretical education, looked down upon the practical, hands-on work of barber surgeons, considering it beneath their dignity. Yet they also depended on barber surgeons to carry out the physical treatments they prescribed, creating an uncomfortable interdependence. A physician might diagnose an illness and prescribe bloodletting, but would refer the patient to a barber surgeon for the actual procedure. This professional relationship reinforced the social divide. the physician maintaining his clean hands and scholarly dignity, while the barber surgeon performed the menial task of actually treating the patient. Yet this arrangement also gave barber surgeons direct contact with patients and the opportunity to demonstrate the practical value of their skills. In the medical hierarchy, physicians claimed the highest position, followed by guild surgeons, who performed more complex operations but did not cut hair, and then barber surgeons. At the bottom were itinerant practitioners like tooth pullers and bone setters who traveled from town to town, often working at fairs and markets without guild membership or formal recognition. These traveling healers occupied a marginal position, sometimes viewed with suspicion by established practitioners and town authorities. Yet, they provided essential services to rural communities without resident barber surgeons, and some developed considerable reputations for specific skills like cataract removal or hernia repair. Their itinerant lifestyle placed them outside the regular social order, giving them freedoms, but also leaving them vulnerable to accusations of charlatanism or fraud. Despite their subordinate position to physicians in theory, barber surgeons were often more trusted by ordinary people. Their accessibility, practical skills, and integration into community life made them familiar figures to whom people turned in times of need. While a physician might be called to attend a wealthy merchant or noble, the barber surgeon treated everyone from apprentices to shopkeepers to laborers, forming the backbone of medieval urban healthcare. This trust was earned through visible results. When a barber surgeon successfully extracted an agonizing tooth, drained a painful abscess, or stopped dangerous bleeding, the benefits were immediate and obvious. In contrast, a physician's humoral adjustments through diet and lifestyle changes produced more gradual effects, if any. For ordinary people concerned with practical relief rather than theoretical elegance, the barber surgeon's approach held obvious appeal. The barber surgeon also occupied a distinctive place in the gendered division of medieval healthcare. While women dominated midwifery and much of family-based healing, and university-educated physicians were exclusively male, barber surgeons operated in a mixed domain. They treated both male and female patients, though with certain limitations regarding female intimate care, and practiced both masculine surgical interventions and more feminine caregiving approaches like wound dressing and herbal applications. By the late medieval period, some barber surgeons had begun to elevate their status through additional education and specialization. Some learned Latin to access medical texts, others focused exclusively on surgery rather than barbering, and some sought association with universities or noble households to enhance their prestige. These efforts reflected growing professional ambition and awareness of the limitations imposed by their middling social status. As we approach the end of our historical journey, let's explore how the barber surgeon has been remembered and represented in literature, art, and popular culture. Echoes of this fascinating profession that continue to resonate in our collective imagination. In art, barber surgeons were often depicted in the midst of their work, providing a valuable visual record of medieval and Renaissance medical practice. The paintings of Dutch artist Jan Steen in the 17th century, for example, show barber surgeons treating patients in lively, detailed scenes that capture both the medical and social aspects of their practice. These artworks serve as windows into a vanished world of medical care. Imagine such a painting. A crowded barber's shop, the practitioner intent on extracting a tooth from a grimacing patient, while other customers wait their turn, perhaps discussing local news or playing backgammon to pass the time. Sunlight streams through a window, illuminating the scene in rich detail, the barber's tools laid out carefully, a basin for bloodletting, perhaps a surgery certificate displayed prominently on the wall. Such images preserve not just the medical techniques, but the entire social context of barber surgery. In literature, barber surgeons appear in numerous works, from Chaucer to Shakespeare and beyond. Perhaps the most famous fictional barber surgeon is Shakespeare's character from The Merry Wives of Windsor, who speaks in comically mangled English and French, representing the practical, somewhat unsophisticated nature associated with the trade, in contrast to university-educated professionals. The barber surgeon also lives on in the character of Sweeney Todd, the demon barber of Fleet Street. a 19th century fictional character whose story has been retold in various forms, most famously in Stephen Sondheim's musical. Though a villainous portrayal, the character's dual identity as barber and surgeon, albeit a murderous one, preserves the memory of this combined profession in popular culture. In modern medicine, the legacy of barber surgeons is acknowledged in the history of surgical education and in the traditions of various surgical colleges and associations. The Royal College of Surgeons in London, for example, displays historical barber surgeon instruments and memorabilia in its museum, acknowledging its origins in the company of barber surgeons. The barber pole, of course, remains the most visible reminder spinning outside barbershops around the world. Though most modern barbers and their customers are unaware of its bloody origins, this distinctive symbol preserves a tangible link to centuries of medical history. A colorful reminder of a time when the care of body and hair, the management of illness and injury were all entrusted to the skilled hands of the barber surgeon. As you drift toward sleep, think of how this history connects us to our ancestors, to their suffering and resilience, their ingenuity in the face of limited knowledge, and their very human efforts to heal and care for one another across the centuries. As our historical journey draws to a close, let's reflect on what the story of barber surgeons tells us about the broader human experience of healing and care across the centuries. The history of the barber surgeon reminds us that the boundaries between professions, seemingly so fixed and natural in our own time, are often fluid historical constructions. What we now see as entirely separate realms, the aesthetic practice of barbering and the medical practice of surgery, were once united in practitioners who moved comfortably between cutting hair and cutting skin, between shaving beards and saving lives. This historical perspective invites us to question our own professional categories and hierarchies. What divisions in our current healthcare system might future generations find equally arbitrary? What forms of knowledge and skill do we perhaps undervalue because they don't fit neatly into our established professional frameworks? The barber surgeon's story also highlights the tension between theoretical and practical knowledge that has run throughout medical history. The university-trained physicians, with their Latin texts and humoral theories, looked down upon the practical, hands-on work of barber surgeons. Yet it was often these practical practitioners who developed effective treatments through observation and experience. This dialogue between theory and practice, between conceptual frameworks and direct observation, continues to shape medicine today. Perhaps most importantly, the history of barber surgeons connects us to the very human constants in the experience of illness and healing. Though medical knowledge and technology have advanced dramatically, the fundamental human needs remain the same: for skilled care in times of injury or illness, for the relief of pain, for the comfort of a healing hand. Imagine now a medieval person entering a barber surgeon's shop, anxious about a painful tooth or a persistent fever. Despite the vast differences in medical understanding and technique, their hopes and fears would be recognizable to us, the universal human experience of vulnerability in illness and gratitude for care that transcends historical periods. As you drift towards sleep, carrying these historical images with you, consider how the red and white barber pole serves as a thread connecting us to centuries of human healing efforts, to the barber surgeons who, with their practical skills and steady hands, provided care and comfort to countless individuals across the medieval and early modern world. Their story is part of the greater human story of how we have cared for one another's bodies and health across the centuries, a story of which modern medicine is just the latest chapter. Thank you for joining me on this historical journey through the world of medieval barber surgeons. I hope these images and stories have brought you both interesting historical knowledge and a sense of peaceful connection to the past as you drift towards sleep. If you've enjoyed this historical journey, please remember to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more soothing historical narratives. Until next time, may history's gentle stories guide you to peaceful dreams.